Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I didn't expect to feel anxious when I first stepped onto the driveway. I'm not someone who usually believes in anything supernatural or strange. I follow facts. I trust logic. But something about this place felt off as soon as I saw the front door. The sky was clear, the afternoon light was steady, and there was no wind, yet I felt a chill on my arms. I even wiped my hands on my jeans to shake it off. I told myself it was just nerves about inheriting a property I knew nothing about. I had never met the relative who left it to me. I only found out about it through a letter that appeared in my mailbox. The house was mine now, free and clear, whether I wanted it or not. The front yard was full of tall grass and overgrown weeds. I parked my car near the fence, turned off the engine, and stepped outside. There was a musty smell in the air. It reminded me of old storage rooms or abandoned buildings, but I tried to ignore it. The paint on the house was faded, and parts of the wood looked like they hadn't been repaired in decades. I fumbled with the keys I'd gotten from the lawyer, trying to find the one that fit the door. When it finally clicked open, I stood there for a second, taking a breath before walking in. The front hallway was dark and the floorboards creaked under my boots. There was dust on every surface. A high ceiling stretched above me, and I could see a long corridor leading to the back of the house. I turned on a flashlight because some corners were too dim to see. Every few steps I heard the wood groan in protest. I moved from room to room that first day. I saw old furniture covered with sheets, shelves with random trinkets, and a large staircase going to the second floor. I wasn't sure how many rooms there were exactly, but it felt like more than I could count on my first pass. I spent the rest of the afternoon opening windows to air the place out. While I did that, I heard occasional sounds in the walls. It could have been rats or mice, maybe even raccoons in the attic. It's an old house, so that was normal. Still, I felt tense. My chest felt tight. I brushed it off and decided to pick a room near the front of the house to sleep in, just so I wouldn't have to walk through dark hallways all the time. Once I cleared some of the dust, that room became my temporary bedroom. It had a heavy wooden door that closed properly. I liked the idea of having a sturdy door between me and the rest of the house while I slept. Night came quickly. I set up a small lamp on the bedside table. The electrical wiring was old, but the power worked as long as I stayed aware of which circuits I used at the same time. I grabbed a quick dinner from the groceries I brought, sat on a folding chair I'd found in the corner, and tried to calm down. The house was mostly silent, except for occasional creaks. There was no television, so I just listened to the old walls. I felt a twinge of unease, but I forced myself to think about normal things. I thought about the errands I needed to run, the repairs the house might need, and the time I'd spend here before deciding whether to sell the place. After a while, I fell asleep, but it was restless. I tossed around a lot, and I woke up more than once during the night. Around midnight, I heard something that made me sit up. There were slow footsteps in the hallway outside my door. They were heavy and deliberate. I froze. I waited to hear them again. For a few seconds, the house was quiet. Then the footsteps resumed, one step at a time, as if someone was pacing back and forth. My heart pounded. My mouth went dry. I told myself I was imagining it, but the sound was too clear. Eventually, it stopped. I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling. I was too unnerved to get up and check. I didn't see any lights in the corridor through the gap under the door, so I had no idea what was out there. I barely slept after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined someone standing right outside. The next morning, I found no sign of anyone else in the house. The rooms were just as dusty as before, with no footprints or indications of an intruder. The doors and windows were still locked. I tried to dismiss it as old board shifting or my tired mind playing tricks. I spent the day unloading more supplies and exploring the upper floors. There was a library with shelves full of old books, a study with a large desk and scattered papers, and a narrow attic with boxes piled high. There was no immediate sign of anything supernatural, but the air felt stale, and a sense of unease never left me. That night, I decided to set up a lamp in the hallway near my room. I wanted some light there, hoping it would make me feel safer. After dinner, I locked my bedroom door and turned off the lamp inside my room, leaving the hallway light on. I lay in bed, eyes fixed on the faint yellow glow coming from under the door. My ears were pricked for any sound. It started again around the same time. Slow steps echoed on the hallway floor. My stomach tightened. The footsteps approached my door, paused, and then moved away again. I felt sweat forming on my temples. My legs tensed. I waited for them to come back. They did. I heard the same slow pacing back and forth as if someone was trying to make me panic. My heart felt like it was in my throat. I stared at the doorknob, expecting it to turn at any moment. But nothing happened. The footsteps carried on for about 10 minutes, then stopped. I listened for breathing, coughing, or any sign of a person. I heard nothing. I wanted to rush out there and confront whoever it was, but my body refused to move. My mind kept flashing through scenarios of what could be on the other side. I stayed in bed until dawn. In the morning, I noticed the lamp in the hallway was still lit, but it was tilted on the small table. It looked as if someone had brushed against it. I knew I hadn't left it at that angle. My hands started shaking when I stood it upright. I checked all the windows again, every door, every possible entrance. They were locked. The dust near the hallway baseboards showed no clear footprints. I couldn't figure it out. I ate a quick breakfast, though I barely tasted my food. I decided to search the place more thoroughly. I opened closets, checked behind furniture, even looked for hidden passages in the walls. I found a locked door at the end of a long corridor on the second floor. It was a thick wooden door with a heavy padlock. I tried to force it with a crowbar from the tools I brought, but it wouldn't budge. I saw no sign of movement in there. The door didn't have a keyhole that fit any of my keys. I made a mental note to come back to it once I found a better tool, or if I could track down a locksmith. By the late afternoon, I was exhausted. I sat on the front porch for a bit, drinking water and trying to clear my head. I thought about leaving, maybe sleeping at a motel until I could hire someone to help me go through the house. But I wanted to face whatever was happening. I didn't like the idea of running away from something I didn't understand. I tried to reason with myself that it could be a squatter or maybe some elaborate trick. I pictured an animal, but the footsteps sounded too human for an animal. That evening, I set up a small camera on a tripod in the hallway. I wanted to record any movement. The camera had an infrared mode, so it would pick up something even in low light. I turned on the hallway lamp, pressed record, and left it there. Then I closed my bedroom door again. This time, I didn't lock it. I wanted to feel like I could get out quickly if I heard something. I waited in bed, reading one of the old books I found in the library. My hands felt jittery. I couldn't focus on the text, so I turned off the light and laid there in the dark, only the hallway lamp lighting the gap under the door. A couple of hours passed in silence. My eyelids grew heavy. I started to drift off. Then the footsteps returned. They were slow, with a slight pause between each step. I froze again. I pulled the blanket up to my chest. My breathing got shallow. I considered jumping out of bed and throwing the door open, but I stayed put. Suddenly, I heard a faint click and my door creaked open an inch. The footsteps continued. My body went rigid. I saw a sliver of hallway light, and something moved in front of it, creating a shadow on my floor. I felt my pulse thudding in my ears. Then the shadow disappeared and the door quietly eased shut again. I tried to breathe normally, but I couldn't. My chest felt heavy. I lay there until the footsteps faded away. I didn't sleep after that. I got up around dawn and checked the camera. The recording was still going. I stopped it and played it back. At first, it showed only the empty hallway. I fast-forwarded until around the time I heard footsteps. The camera's audio picked up the creaking. Then I saw a flicker in the corner of the frame. It looked like a silhouette crossing from one side to the other. I paused and rewound. In slow motion, I saw a dark shape appear on the left side of the screen. pause near my door, and then move out of view. It was too blurry to make out details, but it was definitely a human shape. My stomach tightened, and my mouth felt dry. I played it a few more times, but I couldn't get a clearer image. My hands shook as I powered off the camera. That day, I decided to search the house from top to bottom again. I brought a flashlight, a hammer, and a crowbar. I felt silly, but I also felt threatened. I checked the attic first. The wooden beams were covered in cobwebs, and there were old trunks and boxes, but no place for anyone to hide comfortably. Then I went to that locked door again. I hit the padlock with the hammer, but it was solid. The wood around it didn't splinter. I considered using the crowbar, but it would take too much force, and I was worried about damaging the house's structure. I tried to see if there was another way into that room, maybe from outside. I walked along the second floor exterior. I counted windows. I noticed one window that was boarded up from the inside. It matched the location of the locked room. The boards were old but secured firmly. I moved on. I walked through every corridor. I checked behind drapes, inside closets, and under beds. I didn't see signs of anyone else. By the time evening came, I was frustrated and exhausted. I sat in the front living room with a single lamp, feeling the heaviness in my muscles. I decided to try one more thing that night. I would stay up in the hallway, waiting. I wanted to see this figure with my own eyes. I positioned a chair near the stairs, facing the corridor where I heard most of the footsteps. I had a flashlight and the camera next to me. I kept a small lamp on the floor for extra light. Hours passed. My back got stiff. My head started to nod. Then sometime after midnight, I heard a creak. My eyes snapped open. I gripped the flashlight, shining it down the hall. Nothing appeared. Then I heard another floorboard groan behind me. I spun around. The corridor leading to the locked door looked empty. My throat felt tight. I stood up, holding the flashlight in front of me like a shield. My heart pounded. I started walking, checking each door. Every step felt shaky. I could feel my palms sweating. I made my way down to the end of the hall. The locked door loomed at the far end. I put my ear against it and listened. At first, I heard only my own breath. Then I thought I heard something. It was like a faint scratching or sliding sound. I felt my stomach drop. I pulled back, shining my flashlight on the door. The padlock looked the same as before. I jiggled it to see if it was loose. It held firm. Then I froze because I saw a shadow move along the wall to my right. It wasn't mine. The shape was tall and it seemed to glide rather than walk. My legs trembled. I turned, pointing the flashlight, but there was nothing there. I felt a surge of cold fear in my neck and shoulders, like a chill that made me tense up. I wanted to speak, but I couldn't form words. I backed away until I reached the stairs. I turned and practically stumbled down them, never letting go of the flashlight. I rushed to my bedroom on the first floor, locked the door, and slid down to the floor. My breathing was erratic. I stayed like that for a while. I listened for footsteps but heard nothing. Finally, I crawled into bed and stared at the ceiling, too shaken to sleep. When morning light came through the windows, I felt a strange relief. I got up and decided I needed a break. I drove into town, found a small coffee shop, and spent a few hours there. I tried to figure out what I should do. Part of me wanted to call the police, but what would I say? There was no evidence of a break-in, just my own experiences and a blurry video. I thought about hiring a contractor to break down that locked door. I also thought about simply leaving and never coming back. But something inside me demanded answers. I felt drawn to that locked room and the figure that wandered the halls at night. I bought some tools in town, including a heavy-duty bolt cutter. That evening, I returned to the house. The sun was setting as I stepped inside. I noticed a stillness in the air, as if the house was waiting. I dropped off my tools in the living room. My hands shook a bit, but I took a few deep breaths. My plan was to wait until morning and then tackle that door in daylight when I felt safer. But my nerves were frayed. I didn't know how I would make it through another night here. As I write this, I'm still in that living room, with only one lamp on, tools by my side. I can hear faint noises upstairs. It could be creaking beams or something else. My pulse speeds up each time I hear a thump or a scrape. I keep glancing at the staircase, expecting a silhouette to appear. My throat feels dry and there's a slight pounding in my head. I'm determined to uncover whatever secret this house holds. If there's a presence here, I want to face it and understand why it lingers. I'm going to wait until the first light of dawn before I touch that locked door. Until then, I'll sit here and fight the urge to run. I'm not sure what I'll find, but I know I can't ignore it anymore. This house has secrets, and I'm determined to reveal them. I moved into the old apartment on a hot afternoon. I felt sweat rolling down my forehead as I dragged my suitcases across the scratched hardwood floor. I noticed a stale odor the moment I stepped inside. It reminded me of dust, mildew, and damp plaster. I didn't mind at first because I got the place for cheap, and I prefer being downtown where everything's close. On my first walkthrough, I saw a few cracked walls, some chipped paint near the ceiling, and uneven floorboards in the bedroom. Nothing looked out of the ordinary for a building this old. I set up my belongings, found a corner for my computer desk, and decided to ignore the musty smell. I just wanted to relax for a bit. Later that day, I heard a soft scraping noise from the living room. I paused, stood still in the hallway, and listened again. The noise stopped. I walked to the living room and glanced around. The curtains were drawn, and I noticed a faint shadow on the far wall. It looked like it shifted when I entered, but I assumed it was a trick of the light from the window outside. I dismissed it as nerves from moving day. My first night there, I struggled to sleep. The place felt too quiet. There was this constant drip from the bathroom sink that kept me awake. I got up at one point, walked into the bathroom, and tightened the faucet. When I turned around, I thought I saw a shape near the door. It seemed like a dark silhouette just behind me. I jumped, flicked on the light, and scanned the hallway. It was empty. I felt a rush of adrenaline and my breathing sped up. I told myself I was just exhausted. During the following week, I began to hear odd sounds more often. Light tapping in the walls, short creaks in the hallway, and occasional clicks near the baseboards. I started checking each room to see if there were signs of pests. I didn't see any droppings or shredded material. The landlord had mentioned the building's age, but he didn't say anything about rats or mice. It was late one afternoon when I was cleaning the kitchen floor that I heard a whisper near my ear. It sounded like a faint voice, almost under the level of normal hearing. It came from behind me, but when I turned around, I saw nothing. I felt the hairs on my arm stand on end. My pulse thumped in my ears. I told myself it was just the sound of a draft or maybe the wind outside the window. I'm not the type of person who believes in ghosts. I never bought into haunted house stories. I always believed everything could be explained by logic or science, but I couldn't shake the sense that something was off about this place. At random times, I would catch a glimpse of a dark figure slipping through a doorway, or I'd see a shadow move across the wall even though I was alone. Each time, my chest tightened. I'd look around, scanning corners and crevices, trying to spot an intruder. I considered the possibility that someone else had a key. I even changed the lock out of caution. It didn't help. The noises continued, and the shadows didn't go away. I tried to keep myself busy. I organized the apartment, hung some shelves, and rearranged furniture. While I was hammering a nail into the wall one afternoon, I felt a cool breeze pass by my left side. I didn't hear a window open, and the air conditioning was off. I froze with the hammer in my hand. My arm tensed. I waited, holding my breath. That cool spot lingered for a moment and then disappeared. I finished hammering and took a break to calm down. My hands were a little shaky, and I noticed sweat forming on my forehead, even though the day wasn't that hot. The nights were the worst. Around midnight, I would hear low thuds as if someone was knocking against the inside of the walls. Sometimes I would turn on the TV to drown it out, but that only made me more anxious. I would see movement out of the corner of my eye. I got up once to check the hallway. As I walked toward the door, I heard a soft shuffle on the other side. I reached for the doorknob, exhaled, and opened it. The hallway was empty. I turned on the hallway light and stood there. My arms felt stiff and my fingertips tingled from the tension. I whispered, "Hello?" Nothing answered. One evening, I decided to explore the small storage room at the end of the hall. It had a single naked light bulb in the ceiling. The walls there looked older and more stained. There was a broken chair, some old cardboard boxes, and a lot of dust. I poked around and found some yellowed newspapers. They were from decades ago. I saw no mention of anything alarming. I tried to see if there were signs of squatters or people sneaking in. The door locked from the inside, so I doubted anyone was hiding there. Then, without any warning, the light bulb flickered and went out. I stood in complete darkness, holding my phone flashlight. I felt a surge of panic in my chest and I fumbled with my phone to turn on the light. As soon as I aimed the phone around the room, I thought I saw a shape crouching near the corner. It seemed like a black outline with no features. I stepped back, my heart pounding. Then the shape vanished as I moved the light toward it. I left that room right away. Over the next few days, I tried to rationalize everything. I told myself it was exhaustion or stress. Maybe I was seeing what I wanted to see because the place was creepy, but the constant feeling of being watched started to eat at me. I would be brushing my teeth and feel eyes on my back. I'd rinse my mouth, look in the mirror, and notice a flicker of movement behind me. When I spun around, I saw nothing but the bare wall and the half-open bathroom door. My pulse would race, and I'd struggle to slow my breathing. My arms would feel numb for a few seconds. At one point, I considered sleeping with the lights on. I actually tried it for a few nights. It made me feel more restless because I saw more shadows in the corners. The bright overhead light cast dark shapes on the walls, and those shapes seemed to shift whenever I glanced at them. Sometimes I heard quiet whispers from the hallway. They didn't sound like actual words, more like a faint breath or hushed murmur. I would get up and investigate, pressing my ear to the door. I never heard anything clear, but I could sense a presence on the other side. After a while, I stopped opening the door when I heard the whispers. I just stood there, breathing heavily until it faded away. I invited a friend over one Saturday. I wanted to see if someone else would notice anything strange. He came by in the afternoon, took a look around, and made a few jokes about how the place seemed like it was from a horror movie. He didn't hear the tapping or see the shadows. He just shrugged and told me I was probably tired. Still, I noticed him glancing at the corners of the ceiling. He said he felt a draft that made the hair on his arms stand up, but he assumed the building's insulation was old. When he left, I felt relieved that I wasn't entirely imagining things, but his reaction didn't solve anything. The noises and shadows continued that night. Sometimes I'd be in bed and hear a scrape under the floorboards. It was like nails being dragged across wood. The first time I heard it, I jumped out of bed, flipped on the light, and stood there in my boxers trying to locate the source of the sound. It lasted only a few seconds. Then, total silence. My ears rang from the intensity of my own heartbeat. I tried knocking on the floor with my foot to see if anything would respond. I heard no echo and felt no movement. So I got back into bed and lay there with my eyes open, staring at the ceiling. My sense of reality started to shift. I questioned whether I was safe in my own home. Small details bugged me. The way the temperature in the bedroom sometimes dropped for a few minutes at night, or how I found the closet door cracked open when I was sure I'd closed it. One morning, I woke up to find my set of keys on the kitchen counter instead of on the hook where I usually kept them. I tried to remember if I'd moved them, but I couldn't recall doing that. By the third week, I felt constant tension in my neck and shoulders. My appetite dropped. I started taking walks at odd hours just to get out of the apartment. The city center was busy, full of lights, cars, and people, which actually comforted me. I lingered in a coffee shop until it closed, not wanting to return to the apartment, but I couldn't avoid it all night, so I'd go back eventually. One night around 2 a.m., I heard a distinct knock on the living room wall. It sounded like knuckles tapping 3 times. I was lying on the couch trying to doze off. I jumped to my feet, marched to the wall, and pressed my ear against it. My heartbeat pounded in my head. I knocked back 3 times as well. Nothing. I turned away, and then I heard a single knock behind me, right where I had placed my ear. I spun around so fast I nearly lost my balance. My breath caught in my throat. I felt a chill spread across my shoulders. I said, "Who's there?" in a low, shaky voice. No one answered. After that, I started sleeping with a small light in the hallway and my bedroom door partially open. It helped a little. I saw fewer shadows, but I still sensed them. When I left for work in the mornings, I felt a surge of relief. I was happy to be in a place with other people around me. I found excuses to stay late at the office, telling coworkers I was busy catching up on projects. I just didn't want to go home until I had to. One Thursday evening, I decided I'd had enough. I wanted to see if the landlord knew of any weird history. I called him and he sounded annoyed at my questions about previous tenants. He just said it was an old building and small noises were normal. He denied that anything supernatural had ever been reported. I didn't want to argue, but I asked if I could check the basement. He said fine, gave me a key, and told me to keep it brief. I went down there with a flashlight. The walls were concrete with patches of mold. The air felt cold and I saw dust swirling in the flashlight beam. I inspected some pipes and boxes. I found nothing unusual, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone stood behind me the entire time. I would spin around every few seconds, heart racing. I stayed maybe 10 minutes and then left. That night I tried to calm myself by reading on the couch. My living room lamp flickered now and then. I heard soft footsteps overhead, but the unit above me was vacant. At least that's what the landlord claimed. Around midnight I heard a door creak in the hallway. I rose from the couch and walked to my front door, careful not to make much noise. As I peered through the peephole, I saw nothing. Then I heard that same faint whisper right on the other side of my door. It sent a jolt through my body and I nearly dropped to my knees. My pulse hammered and my hands shook. I took a step back, feeling my mouth go dry. I stood there for a long time, waiting for the noise to stop. Eventually it did. I've lived here for almost a month now. The shadows still appear in my peripheral vision. The susurros still happen at odd times. Every time I think about leaving, I remind myself that I'm paying less rent than I would anywhere else in the city. I keep telling myself it's all in my head, but the tension in my body feels real. My shoulders ache most of the time. My stomach twists whenever I hear a random shuffle in the hallway. My sleep is broken up by knocks, clicks, and the occasional whisper near my bed. I wish I could say I figured out the cause. I haven't. I still walk around the apartment, checking corners and flipping lights on and off, hoping to catch something in the act. I haven't seen a face or anything solid, but I've seen movement. I've felt touches. At times, a soft pressure brushes my arm or neck, like a cool hand. When that happens, my vision blurs for a moment, and my breath catches. Sometimes I wonder if I'm losing it. Other times I wonder if there really is something here that can't be explained. I keep my phone nearby at all times now. Part of me wants to record the noises, but the idea of playing back a whisper or a voice makes my stomach tighten. I'm worried I'll hear something I can't handle. I'm tired of jumping at every sound. I'm tired of second-guessing my senses. But at the same time, I'm fascinated by the possibility that there's something beyond ordinary logic in these walls. Tonight, I'm sitting on my couch again, writing this all down because I need to get it out of my head. The lamp on my side table is steady. The kitchen is dark. The bathroom door is closed. I'm wearing a hoodie because the air feels cold near my arms. My ears are tuned to every creak. I keep glancing at the hallway, expecting to see a shadow slip by. My heart flutters every time my fridge hums. When the air conditioner clicks on, I tense up. I haven't heard a whisper yet, but I know it might come later. I'm not sure if I'll stay here much longer. This place is wearing me down. My skepticism is still there, but it's buried under my daily experiences. I want to believe there's a rational explanation. Old pipes, faulty wiring, or my own stress. But at night, when I'm alone, I feel the hair on my neck stand up. I notice those fleeting shapes in the corners. I hear those gentle clicks in the walls. It's not a story I ever thought I'd tell. Yet here I am, living through it each day, waiting for some kind of resolution. For now, I'm just trying to cope. I lock my doors, keep my keys close, and sleep with my phone next to me. I can't say I'm at peace, but I haven't given up on staying sane either. If something is here, it hasn't harmed me physically. It only reminds me night after night that it's there, lurking just out of sight, and I'm left wondering when it will show itself again. I stepped into my old family house on a cold evening. I planned a quick visit to collect a few belongings left behind by my grandparents. My first steps in the front hallway felt strange. The floorboards creaked in a pattern that made me pause. The air smelled damp and stale, like the house had been shut too long. I tried to shake off the unease, but something about the silence made me uneasy. That was the night I found the diaries, and everything in my life changed. I discovered a small trunk in the attic. I had come up there looking for old photographs, but I stumbled on this dusty wooden box. The metal latch was broken, so I pried it open without much effort. Inside, I saw several notebooks and journals. They looked old and worn out, with yellowed pages and ink that had faded in places. I blew off a layer of dust and coughed when it clouded around my face. After a moment, I flipped open the first diary on the stack. At first, I skimmed the pages for family gossip or historical notes. Instead, I found descriptions of strange occurrences, muffled voices in the hallway at night, doors opening on their own, shadows flickering across windows in empty rooms. My name was in a few entries. Those references were brief, but they startled me. I read lines like, "He may sense it someday," or "He will see what we all saw." Those words made my hands tremble. I read deeper, sorting through each diary. They belonged to different relatives over the years. Some diaries were from my grandmother, others from an uncle, others from relatives I barely knew. But the stories were similar. Each writer described footsteps, whispers, and unsettling presences. All of them had doubts at first. Then they ended up convinced that the house held something they couldn't explain. I always relied on logic in my life. I believed in facts, evidence, and rational explanations. I never questioned the normal flow of things. When I finished reading the diaries, I told myself that people can scare themselves. Fear can be contagious. Maybe each family member read old notes and created new entries under the same influence. That's what I told myself. But I started hearing things that night, and it was hard to ignore. Around midnight, I heard the first whisper. It sounded like someone muttering a single word in the dark. I couldn't make out what they said, but it made my heart pound. I got up from the old armchair in the living room. I walked across the creaking floor to see if someone was there. I found nothing. The room was still. No one else was in the house. I tried to settle down and blame it on a draft. A few minutes later, a soft scraping noise came from the hallway. It could have been a mouse or some other rodent, but it sounded more deliberate. It stopped the moment I stepped onto the hallway's wooden floor. I went back to the living room, turned on a few lamps, and tried to concentrate on my breathing. My chest felt tight. My palms were sweaty. I told myself it was just nerves and the old diaries getting to my head. I sat down at the small table and flipped through more pages, hoping to distract myself. Then I saw a note that mentioned a locked door in the basement. I hadn't been in the basement for years. My grandparents stored junk there, and I never had a reason to go down. The diary mentioned hearing scratching noises near that door and seeing a shadow drift under it. The writer claimed there was something behind that door. I decided to check it out right away. I carried a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and found the door to the basement in the back hallway. The door hinges squeaked when I pulled it open. A waft of musty air hit my face. The basement steps were steep and narrow, and the light switch at the top didn't work. I aimed the flashlight around and went down step by step. The air was cold and smelled of damp stone. My feet moved slowly, trying not to trip on the broken wooden steps. At the bottom, I saw crates and an old workbench. The The flashlight beam revealed cobwebs in the corners. I saw dust floating in the air. In the far left corner, I noticed another door. It looked older than the rest of the basement. The paint was peeled and the wood seemed chipped. My flashlight showed a metal padlock attached to a thick latch. The diaries had mentioned a locked door, but I wasn't sure if this was the one. I walked closer. There was a slight draft coming from around the door's edges. I leaned in and listened. I heard a faint sound inside, like a quiet shuffle. I stood there, staring at the door. My throat tightened. My hands shook. I felt a surge of adrenaline, and my first impulse was to walk away. But curiosity pushed me forward. I grabbed the lock, tested it. It was solid. I didn't see a key anywhere in the basement, and I didn't see any reason to force it open at that moment. The diaries never said what was behind the door, only that no one ever opened it. After a while, I backed off, wiped my forehead, and decided to go back upstairs. I spent the rest of the night reading the diaries in the living room, trying to find a clue about that locked door. I read about footsteps that moved from room to room, about lights flickering, about doors slamming shut when no wind was blowing. Several diary entries mentioned cold spots. One of them said, "The presence grows stronger when it's ignored." That line stuck with me. It implied that something was reacting to attention, or lack of attention. The diaries didn't provide a straightforward explanation. They were more like personal accounts, each writer describing what they heard and saw. As the night wore on, I grew more tense. My eyes felt tired, but I couldn't sleep. I jumped at every small noise, house-settling sounds, the wind outside, the hum of the old refrigerator in the kitchen. Everything felt magnified. Around 3 a.m., I dozed off in the armchair. I woke up to the sound of a door creaking. My heart thumped in my chest and my eyes flew open. The living room door stood half open. It had been closed before I fell asleep. I listened and heard a soft step. I held my breath and stood up, shining my flashlight around. The beam caught a glimpse of movement in the hallway near the bottom of the staircase. It disappeared as fast as I noticed it. I ran over to that spot, but I found nobody there. My heart hammered so hard that I felt dizzy. My skin was cold with sweat. My body shook. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. My mind raced, looking for explanations. I felt sure I had seen a shape. It was about the size of an adult, but it moved in a way that felt unnatural, like it floated or glided. I inhaled slowly and forced myself to check the rooms nearby. Each room was empty. Nothing was out of place except for a slight shift in the dusty footprints on the floor. I saw footprints, but they looked faded, like they'd been there a long time. I couldn't tell if they were mine. I spent the next morning searching for a key to that basement door. I combed through drawers in the kitchen. I opened old tin boxes in the attic. I checked under loose floorboards in the bedroom. I found old photographs, receipts, and letters, but no key. I felt a growing urge to open that door, like it might give me answers. At one point, I pushed away some boxes in a corner of the attic and saw a small metal container. It was locked, but the lid was loose enough for me to pop open with a screwdriver. Inside, I found a set of keys on a rusted ring. I carried them downstairs and compared them to the padlock. The third key fit. I didn't open the door right away. I just tested the key. It slid in and turned with a click that echoed in the basement. I stood there in the basement with my flashlight, staring at that lock. My heart pounded in my ears. My mouth felt dry. I asked myself if I was ready. I didn't know what to expect. Part of me believed I'd find an empty storage space or a small closet. Another part of me dreaded seeing something that matched the diary's descriptions of shadows and whispers. I decided to do it. I turned the key again, heard the lock pop, and removed the padlock. I placed my hand on the latch, hesitated, then lifted it. The door opened with a creak. A damp breeze blew against my face. I felt goosebumps on my arms. I aimed the flashlight inside. The space was small, maybe the size of a closet. Shelves lined the walls. Old jars and dusty tools cluttered the shelves. The floor was concrete. I saw a light switch on the wall, so I flicked it up. A single bare bulb lit up the room. I stepped inside. Nothing seemed unusual at first. Then I noticed a faint stain on the wall in the back corner. It looked like water damage, but it had an odd shape. I stepped closer, and the temperature dropped. My breath came out in a white puff. I heard a noise above me, a scraping sound. I jerked my head up, but only saw the ceiling beams. Suddenly, the door slammed behind me. The bulb flickered. I tried to open the door, but it felt stuck, like someone was holding it from the other side. My heart pounded and my breathing grew fast. I called out, but my voice echoed in the small space. After several tries, the door gave way, and I stumbled out into the basement. The door stayed open and I saw no one. I checked the latch. It wasn't locked. There was no reason for it to stick like that. I rushed upstairs, feeling my legs shake with each step. The diaries had said that unexplained forces moved through the house. They mentioned doors closing, voices, strange shapes. Now I believed it. I grabbed the diaries again and read more entries. One described a feeling of being watched. Another mentioned an overwhelming chill when the writer approached that same locked door. I realized I was repeating every detail from those old pages. For several days I stayed in the house, determined to investigate. I spent my afternoons exploring each room, checking for hidden compartments, loose planks, or old vents that might create illusions. I ran my hand along the walls in the upstairs hallway, pressed my ear against them, tapped them. I heard hollow spots, but nothing that led to a secret space. The house seemed normal in daylight, except for a few cold drafts and the occasional sound of footsteps in distant rooms. At night, the tension grew. I heard soft thumps and faint whispers. My senses felt hyper-aware. My heart raced at every noise. I found myself sweating even when the temperature was low. My stomach was always tense. Sometimes I couldn't eat. I kept waiting for something else to happen. I wanted a clear view of whatever roamed this place. I carried a camera, tried to record audio, tried to catch any evidence. My recordings only captured static and the normal creaks of an old house. One evening, I was in the living room reading an entry from my grandfather's diary. He described a moment when he felt a presence stand behind him as he sat in that very chair. He wrote that he felt pressure on his shoulders, like invisible hands. I stopped reading when I felt something brush against my neck. I jumped up, spinning around, shining my flashlight behind me. No one was there, but the air where I stood felt colder than before. My hair stood on end. My skin tingled. I rubbed my arms, trying to warm up. That night, I woke up twice to the sound of footsteps in the hall. Each time I rushed out of bed, but I saw no one. The second time, I decided to stay quiet and peek through a crack in the door. The footsteps sounded slow, like boots on wood. They got closer, paused near my bedroom door, then continued. A shadow drifted across the narrow gap under the door. It moved away, and I heard the stairs creak, one step at a time. I felt glued to the spot, afraid to open the door. My heart raced, and I could hear my pulse in my ears. In the morning, I tried to rationalize it. I searched the house again, checking for any sign of intruders. Nothing was stolen or disturbed. The doors and windows were locked. I found no footprints outside. I wrote down my experiences in a blank notebook. My handwriting shook when I described the shape I had seen in the hallway. Each entry I wrote seemed to echo the older diaries, like I was adding my name to a chain of strange observations. On my last night in the house, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the hallway through the open door. The lights were on. I kept them all on to feel safer. It didn't help much, but it felt better than sitting in the dark. Around midnight, I heard a shuffle behind the wall. It sounded close, like someone was sliding their hand across the plaster. I stood up and placed my ear against the wallpaper. I heard a faint knock, like a single tap. I knocked back. Silence. My chest felt tight and my hands trembled. I swallowed hard and stepped away. That same night, I heard a low whisper by the window. I moved closer, shining my flashlight. I saw a shape near the curtains. It shifted, then disappeared. My heart thundered. My chest felt heavy and I could barely breathe. I forced myself to walk forward and yank the curtains aside. Nothing was there. No footprints, no sign of any person. just my reflection in the window, looking pale and scared. My hair was damp with sweat, and my eyes looked wide. I realized I couldn't handle many more nights like this. The next morning, I packed the diaries and left the house. Before I walked out the front door, I paused and listened. The house seemed quiet in the daylight. The floors didn't creak. There were no whispers. The air felt normal, but I knew that calm was temporary. I could feel the same tension that was always there, lurking in the silence. I locked up and drove away. My head felt cluttered with questions. Those diaries proved that everyone in my family who spent time in that house experienced the same things. The footsteps, the shadows, the voices. I still have those diaries. Sometimes I read them in my apartment, far from that old house. When I read them, I remember how I felt in those hallways and how the nights never seemed to end. Even now, I hear faint sounds sometimes, especially late at night. I don't know if I brought something with me or if my mind is still stuck in that cycle of fear and curiosity. I don't plan on returning to that house anytime soon. The diaries are enough to remind me that logic doesn't always explain everything. And I know that every creak, every rustle, and every faint whisper there is real to the person who hears it. I arrived at the hotel late in the afternoon with a tight schedule and a heavy briefcase. I had heard a few rumors about this place, mostly from coworkers who like to gossip about old properties with haunted histories. I shrugged those off as nonsense. I'm not the type to believe in ghosts or curses. I usually spend my time dealing with numbers and quarterly reports, not legends. But the moment I walked into the lobby, I felt something off. The air smelled stale, like old books in a closed-up library. The wallpaper looked worn and faded, and the staff at the front desk moved with a strange slowness. I got my key, thanked the clerk, and headed up to my room on the third floor. I stepped out of the old elevator and looked down a long corridor lined with vintage carpets and dim lamps. The hallway stretched out in front of me, and I noticed how my footsteps made a distinct echo. The sound bounced off the high ceilings, carrying a faint tremor that rattled the frames on the walls. The place felt quiet, almost like I was the only guest around. I thought it was unusual for a hotel that claimed to be popular with tourists. Still, I had a meeting the next morning, so I pushed my concerns aside. Inside my room, I dropped my bags on the floor and clicked on the lights. A single bulb in the overhead fixture hummed. The decor was old-fashioned. The bedspread had a pattern of small red flowers, and the curtains had the same design. There was a tall wooden dresser by the window and a small desk near the bed. The silence pressed in on me. I could hear my own breathing, steady but slightly faster than normal. I chalked it up to the stress of travel. I unpacked enough clothes for the next day, then kicked off my shoes. The floor creaked under my weight, and I wondered how many years this wood had seen. I touched the walls. The paint felt cold and had a slight roughness. I noticed a musty scent, like the place hadn't been aired out in a while. My throat felt dry, so I grabbed a bottle of water from my bag and took a few swigs. After resting for a moment on the edge of the bed, I decided to take a walk around the hotel. I wanted to clear my head and maybe find the vending machines. I also felt an odd curiosity about this building. I left my room and walked down the corridor. I made my way to the staircase, passing an antique mirror. The reflection of the hallway behind me looked darker in the mirror than it did in real life. I paused for a second, feeling an unexpected chill. Then I heard a soft thud from somewhere above. It sounded like a footstep, but slower. My skin prickled and I felt a faint rush of adrenaline. I told myself it was just another guest walking around. I started climbing the stairs, noticing every squeak the steps made. On the fourth floor, the hallway lights were a bit dimmer, and the wallpaper looked older. I peeked around the corner, but I didn't see anyone. Yet I caught the scent of something like damp earth. It reminded me of wet soil after a rain. I knew that smell had no reason to be in a hotel corridor. My pulse quickened. I stood there, listening. The walls felt like they were holding their breath, waiting for me to move. After a few seconds, I heard the faintest shuffle. I couldn't pinpoint the direction. I swallowed hard, feeling my mouth go dry again. I stayed still for a moment longer, then turned around and headed back down the stairs. The quiet made me uneasy, but I tried to keep my mind focused on practical things. Maybe the building had ventilation problems. Maybe the staff were just understaffed and couldn't keep every floor lit properly. I made it to the ground floor and found a small lounge area. The furniture looked antique. The cushions had sunken spots and the armrests were frayed. I ran my hand over one of the chairs, feeling dust cling to my fingertips. I checked a few doors until I found what looked like a dining room, but it was dark. Only a few emergency lights lit the space. The tables were set with plain white napkins and the silverware caught a dull gleam. It didn't look like anyone had eaten there in a while. A faint tapping sound startled me. It came from the corner of the room near a small corridor that led to the kitchen. I moved closer, my heart beating faster. The tapping stopped and I smelled that damp earth odor again. It was more pronounced now. My arms felt goosebumps. I coughed once, trying to clear the tightness in my chest. I couldn't see anything in the darkness, but I felt watched. My instincts told me to get out of there. I backed away and returned to the main lounge. At the front desk, I tried to ask the clerk about the weird smells and the noises. She was a middle-aged woman with hollow cheeks and tired eyes. She said something about old pipes and the building's age. Her voice had a slight tremor, like she didn't believe her own explanation. When I asked about legends or stories, she just shook her head. She said people talk about all kinds of things when a place is over 100 years old. I felt she was holding something back, but I didn't push her. I nodded and took the elevator back up to my floor. In my room, I locked the door and turned on both the overhead light and the small lamp on the nightstand. I sat down at the desk, trying to distract myself with emails. My laptop took forever to connect to the hotel's network. While I waited, I kept glancing at the door, expecting something. I forced myself to focus on my screen, but my neck felt stiff. My breath came in shallow bursts, and I was starting to get a dull headache. The lamp flickered once, making me jump. My heart pounded, and I realized I was sweating. I wiped my forehead and stood up to adjust the air conditioning. The unit made a rattling sound, but didn't seem to cool the room much. The musty smell lingered. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I decided to shower and try to get some rest. In the bathroom, the water pressure was weak, and the pipes rattled behind the walls. I felt trapped in that tiny space, so I made it a quick shower. After drying off, I checked the time and saw it was almost midnight. I knew I had to wake up early, but I couldn't shake my nerves. My muscles felt tense, and every small noise in the corridor drew my attention. The floor outside creaked more than usual. It sounded like someone was pacing back and forth. I turned off the bathroom light and stood near the door, listening. The pacing continued. Then it stopped suddenly, as if whoever was out there was waiting. My stomach felt like I'd swallowed stones. I turned the lock on my door again, just to be sure. I slid under the covers, fully clothed except for my shoes. I kept the lamp on. My eyes started to close, but then I heard a low shuffle of footsteps outside. They moved past my door and faded into the distance. I shut my eyes, hoping to drift off, but my mind stayed alert. I breathed slowly, in and out, counting each breath. After a few minutes, I managed to doze, but my sleep felt shallow. A sudden rattling at the doorknob jolted me awake. My heart slammed against my chest. I sat up and stared at the door. My hands clenched the sheets. The rattling continued for a second, then stopped. I called out, "Hello?" No answer. I waited, hardly breathing. After maybe half a minute, I heard soft footsteps moving away. I stood up and tiptoed to the door, pressing my ear against it. The hallway was silent. I looked through the peephole. It only showed an empty corridor. My pulse roared in my ears and I could feel sweat trickling down my temples. I opened the door a crack and peeked outside. The corridor looked the same as before, with those old lamps casting weak light. I saw no one, and I heard nothing. I stepped out, leaving my door propped open. The carpet felt rough under my socks. I held my breath and scanned the hallway in both directions. At the far end, I noticed a flicker of motion near the last lamp. It looked like a tall, hunched figure moving into the shadows. My stomach churned. My hands started shaking. I quietly stepped back into my room and locked the door again. I tried to calm myself by turning on the TV, but the screen showed static on most channels. I found a news channel, but the signal was weak. The flickering images and spotty audio just made me more uneasy. I paced around the room, listening for more sounds. The floor creaked under every step and the old radiator hissed in the corner. I decided I couldn't stay there, waiting. I had to see what was going on. I wanted to find some explanation. I felt I wouldn't sleep anyway unless I did. I grabbed my flashlight from my suitcase. I always carry one when I travel, just in case. I opened the door and peered into the hallway again. It looked empty. I quietly moved along the corridor, shining the flashlight into corners and behind the few pieces of furniture. The air felt thick and humid. Every so often I caught that damp earth smell. I tried not to breathe through my nose. I reached the end of the hallway near the old mirror. I paused, checking my surroundings. My throat felt tight. I heard a faint scraping sound from behind me, near the elevator. My chest tightened and I spun around. I saw nothing, but I felt a presence, like someone was standing just a few feet away watching. My skin crawled. My flashlight beam shook in my hand. I forced myself to walk toward the elevator. The panel had a tarnished look, and one button was missing. I hit the down button and the doors creaked open. Nobody was inside. I stepped in and pressed the button for the lobby. The elevator jerked, then started its slow descent. The overhead light flickered. My reflection in the stainless steel doors looked pale and tense. My mouth was drawn tight and my eyes looked wide. The elevator made a grinding noise, then stopped on the second floor. The doors slid open a bit. The hallway there was pitch black. My flashlight beam caught a glimpse of old portraits on the wall. Then something moved across the open door. It had a shape like a person, but the limbs seemed bent at strange angles. The face was partially hidden in shadow, but the jaw looked longer than normal, and the eyes caught the light like an animal's eyes at night. I froze, and every hair on my body stood on end. My legs felt weak, and my breath caught in my throat. I tried to speak, but no words came out. The figure moved away, disappearing into the darkness. My heart hammered so hard I thought it would burst. I jammed my thumb against the closed doors button, and the elevator finally obeyed. It resumed its descent, but it felt slower than before. I clutched the flashlight against my chest, trying to steady my breathing. My mind raced. Was this some sick prank, or had I actually seen something I couldn't explain? The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened and I hurried out. The front desk stood empty. The lights in the lobby were still on, but they seemed dimmer. I called out, "Hello?" My voice echoed. No response. I circled the lobby, checking the doors to the lounge and the dining room. They were locked now. The main entrance was locked too. I realized the night staff must have stepped away, or maybe they left altogether. I tried using my key card to unlock the front door, but it didn't work. The door rattled in its frame. I felt a surge of panic in my stomach. I stepped back, thinking of the fire exit. I found a side door marked with an exit sign. The handle turned, but the door wouldn't budge, like something was blocking it from outside. My hands shook. I felt trapped. My mind scrambled for options. I considered calling the police, but my cell phone showed no signal. The landline at the front desk went straight to static. I felt a drop of sweat roll down my back. I stood there, swallowing hard, listening for any sign of another person. The hotel made a low creaking sound, like the entire building was shifting in the wind. Footsteps echoed from upstairs again, faint but distinct. I moved back to the lobby desk and rifled through some paperwork, hoping to find a master key or some information about another exit. I found a binder labeled Maintenance. I flipped through it. The pages were full of notes about strange sightings, unexplained odors, and repeated complaints of scratching noises in the walls. My heart thumped. My vision blurred for a second as I realized this was no one-time glitch. This hotel had a record of weird events. I read about a figure that prowled the upper floors, described by some as an animal-like shape. The notes mentioned that staff tried to ignore it or blame the old pipes, but the binder had scribbles in the margins, phrases like skinwalker-like and don't follow it. My mouth went dry. My hands trembled. I flipped more pages. There were mentions of staff hearing low growling, of a shape moving through the corridors at night, of footprints that led to dead ends. I slammed the binder shut, chest tight with fear. A loud thump came from somewhere behind the desk, and I jumped back, nearly dropping the flashlight. I shone the beam over the desk and saw a small door behind it. It looked like a storage closet. I stood still, heart pounding. Then I heard another thump. It was soft but insistent, like someone bumping against the door from the inside. I backed away, heading toward the elevator again. The elevator doors were closed, and I didn't want to risk them getting stuck. I spotted a staircase in the corner of the lobby. My thoughts jumped between finding a way out and confronting whatever was in that closet. I decided I had to know what was going on here. But I couldn't make my feet move toward the closet. My entire body felt tense and my stomach felt tight. Then the doorknob turned just a fraction of an inch, and I heard a scraping noise from inside. I couldn't handle it. I turned and ran to the stairwell, pulling the heavy door open. The staircase was lit by a single emergency bulb on each landing. I started climbing. I thought maybe I could get to my room, grab my bag, and break a window if necessary. My shoes banged against the concrete steps. My breathing was ragged. My heart felt like it was racing at a dangerous pace. I reached the second floor. I paused, shining the flashlight into the hallway. It was still dark. I saw doors on each side, all closed. I stepped into the corridor, feeling my knees tremble. Then I heard something scrape against the floor behind me. I spun around. Nothing was there. I heard a low hiss, like an exhale. The smell of damp soil flooded my nose. My stomach lurched. My flashlight beam wavered. A shape slid into view at the far end of the hall. It was tall and thin, with limbs that seemed too long. I couldn't see its face clearly, but I saw the eyes reflecting the flashlight's beam. They glowed a dull yellow. I felt an intense pressure in my chest. My breath caught and my fingers grew numb. I wanted to run, but my legs felt cemented to the floor. The figure made a slight movement toward me. I heard a soft clicking sound, like bone against bone. My mind screamed at me to move, so I forced my legs to take a step back. I gripped the flashlight so hard my knuckles hurt. Then I turned and sprinted back into the stairwell, slamming the door behind me. I raced up the steps, ignoring the pain in my calves and the burn in my lungs. I reached my floor and burst into the corridor. I fumbled with my keycard, cursing under my breath until the door unlocked. I stumbled inside, locking it behind me. My hand shook as I pushed the dresser against the door, hoping to barricade it. I leaned against the dresser, panting. My head throbbed, and my vision blurred at the edges. I stood there listening. My ears rang with the silence. Then I heard a faint scratching at my door. I pressed my back to the dresser, heart pounding, breath coming in gasps. The scratching stopped, replaced by slow footsteps that drifted away. I stayed like that for the rest of the night, pressed against the dresser, staring at the door, listening to every creak and groan. My fear was raw and constant. My body ached from tension, and my mind kept replaying the sight of that figure's glowing eyes. I waited until the morning light seeped through the curtains. The footsteps and scraping noises faded as dawn approached. Once the sun was up, I moved the dresser aside, gathered my things in a rush, and forced myself to open the door. I made it to the lobby, shaking. The clerk was back at the front desk, acting like nothing had happened. I demanded to check out, not caring about my reservation or my meeting. She didn't argue. She printed my bill, barely looking at me. I didn't speak. I just grabbed my slip of paper and pushed through the front doors, which were unlocked now. Outside, I took a deep breath of fresh air. My chest felt lighter. I headed straight to my car and drove away, not looking back. I don't know what I saw in that hotel. I can't explain the noises or the smells or that figure with the glowing eyes. but I know I won't return to that place. The memory still makes my skin crawl, and every time I think about it, I feel a tightness in my chest and a tremor in my hands. I've stayed in many hotels for work, but that one changed something in me. I don't believe in legends or ghosts, but I can't deny what I experienced. All I want is to forget those footsteps in the corridor and that tall shape moving in the dark. I don't think I ever will. I never thought I would question my own senses. I used to trust what I saw, heard, and felt. Then I moved into that isolated house in the mountains. Now I'm not sure about anything. When I first arrived, the place looked ordinary. It had a small porch, a wide living room, a couple of bedrooms, and a narrow staircase leading to a second floor. The walls were plain, the floors were made of worn wooden boards, and the windows had old frames. There was nothing special about the layout, but the location itself was peaceful. The closest neighbor lived about 20 minutes down a dirt road. I thought I would have the quiet I needed to focus on my work. I was wrong. I spent my first day unpacking a few things. I brought some boxes of clothes, some books, and my laptop. I didn't bother with decorations. I wanted to keep the space simple. I checked the windows to see if they opened smoothly. I tested the faucets to make sure the water worked. The pump made a slight rattling sound, but it delivered enough water for a quick shower. I walked around outside to see the nearby trees and the slope behind the house. The area was full of tall evergreens that creaked in the wind. A light breeze carried a hint of damp earth. The mountain air felt chilly on my cheeks. By the time evening came, I was tired from lifting boxes and moving small pieces of furniture around. I cooked some pasta on an old electric stove. The stove was noisy and one of the burners didn't work. I sat at a wooden table in the kitchen and ate in silence. I could hear my own chewing echo in the empty room. When I finished, I placed the dishes in the sink and wiped my hands. Everything felt normal. Then I heard a faint thump. It came from somewhere near the hallway that led to the living room. It wasn't loud. It sounded like someone dropped a small object on the floor. At first I thought it might be something inside one of the boxes shifting because I hadn't placed it properly. I got up, turned on the living room light, and took a look around. There were still some unopened boxes stacked near a shelf. I glanced at them, but they seemed stable. I noticed a slight draft coming from under the front door. I realized the temperature had dropped outside. I didn't think much of the thump. I decided I was just jumpy because I was alone in a new place. I locked the front door, shut off the living room light, and walked upstairs to the bedroom. The stairs creaked under my weight. Each step sounded louder than normal because the house felt so quiet. I set up a small lamp in my bedroom, placed my phone on the bedside table, and sat on the bed. I scrolled through a few messages but had no service. I made a mental note to check for a better signal area outside. I left the bedroom door open, turned off the lamp, and settled in for the night. It took me a while to fall asleep. Around midnight, I woke up to a soft scraping sound outside my bedroom. It was consistent, like something being dragged across the floor. I sat up in bed, my heart beating fast. My mouth felt dry. I waited, barely breathing, trying to hear it again. The scraping stopped. I stared at the open door. The hallway was dark. No light came from downstairs. I noticed a slight chill in the room. My arms felt goosebumps forming and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I thought about flipping on the lamp, but I hesitated. I wasn't sure if I wanted to see whatever was out there. I told myself it could be a branch against the house or some loose gutter. After a few minutes of total silence, I got up, walked to the hallway, and ran my hand along the wall. I found the switch and turned on the hall light. It flickered once, and then stayed on, revealing the narrow corridor. I saw nothing unusual. The floor looked the same as before, just bare boards with a few scuffs. I checked around. The guest bedroom door was closed. The bathroom door was open. Everything was empty. I returned to my room and tried to sleep again, but I couldn't relax. The next morning I woke up feeling stiff and uneasy. My eyes were puffy from lack of rest. I went downstairs to make coffee. I checked the front door. It was still locked. I glanced out the window near the door. I saw sunlight hitting the mountains. The peaks were dark green with thick pines. Clouds drifted across the sky. I tried to calm myself by focusing on the normal things around me. I noticed a new creaking sound when I walked across the living room floor. It seemed to come from under the boards. I decided to ignore it, thinking old houses often have all sorts of noises. I spent most of the day writing notes for my project. I kept my laptop on the kitchen table. I listened for odd sounds, but everything seemed quiet. Sometimes I heard the wind in the trees outside or the hum of the fridge cycling on and off. By late afternoon, I felt some tension lift. I thought maybe I had let my imagination run wild the previous night. But as evening approached, I felt a slight heaviness in my chest. I was dreading nightfall. I couldn't explain it to myself in a logical way. I started pacing around the living room, checking the windows, testing the locks, and flipping the light switches. When the sun went down, I turned on every lamp in the house. I left the overhead lights in the kitchen, living room, and hallway on. I wanted to see every corner. I walked through each room slowly, trying to prove to myself that nothing was wrong. I even pulled open the closet doors upstairs and looked behind the shower curtain in the bathroom. Everything was empty. After that, I sat at the kitchen table with a sandwich, but my stomach felt tight. I forced myself to eat half of it. Then I heard a tapping sound coming from the living room window. It was short and irregular. Tap, tap, pause, tap. My chest tightened. I stood up, my heart racing. I stared at the living room. The tapping continued for a few more seconds, then stopped. I turned the corner into the living room and moved toward the window. I could see the reflection of the lamp on the glass. Outside, the darkness swallowed most details. I leaned closer and scanned the area. I didn't see any branch that could be brushing against the window. The tapping had sounded too deliberate for that. I felt a cold sweat on my forehead. My breathing got shallow. I told myself it could be the wind or some insect or even a small bird. I went outside through the front door to check. The air felt cold, and the night was silent. I walked around to the side of the house with my phone flashlight. There was nothing near the window, no loose branch, no obvious cause for the noise. I felt uneasy standing there, exposed to the darkness. I hurried back inside. I decided I would stay awake as long as I could. I made another cup of coffee and tried to distract myself. I checked a few messages on my phone when I found a spot in the kitchen where I got a single bar of service. I saw a message from a friend asking if I was settling in. I typed a quick reply saying everything was fine, even though my hands were shaking. I tried to sound normal. I placed my phone on the table, stared at the steam rising from my coffee mug, and listened to my heartbeat. Around 10 o'clock, I heard something in the hallway again. It sounded like footsteps, but lighter than an adult's steps. They moved slowly along the corridor floor. My arms tensed, and I felt goosebumps again. My mouth went dry, and I held my breath. I got up from the chair and approached the living room entry. The footsteps stopped. I peered around the corner and saw nothing. The corridor light was on, and the hall looked empty. I heard a soft rustling sound. It reminded me of clothing moving against a surface, but I couldn't see anyone. My skin felt cold. My eyes watered from staring too hard. Then I noticed a slight blur at the end of the corridor, near the staircase. It looked like a distortion, almost like heat waves in the air. I blinked a few times, but it didn't go away. It shifted, as if it was swaying or moving from side to side. My heart hammered in my chest. I wanted to speak, but my throat felt tight. I forced out a word. "Hello?" My voice cracked. The blur flickered for a moment, then vanished. The corridor seemed empty again. I stood there, my pulse pounding in my ears. I felt a knot in my stomach. I didn't know what I had just seen. Part of me wanted to run out of the house, but I couldn't leave. This was my place. I needed to stay. I needed to figure out what was happening. I walked to the stairs, flipped on the light switch for the second floor, and called out again. No answer. I climbed the steps one by one, listening for any movement. The boards creaked as I went up. When I reached the top, I glanced down the hallway there. It was empty. The doors to the bedrooms were open. There was no furniture in the guest room, just a few boxes. I looked inside, shining my phone flashlight into the corners. Nothing. I felt the hairs on my arms standing up. I closed the guest room door and went to my bedroom. I sat on the edge of my bed and tried to catch my breath. My thoughts raced. I wanted to deny what I'd seen, but I knew it was there. Something intangible, something that moved and made sounds. I tried to think about what it could mean. My chest felt tight and I could sense my heartbeat pulsing in my throat. I rubbed my eyes, trying to clear my vision. Then, I heard a soft whisper right behind me. It sounded like a single word, drawn out, but I couldn't understand it. I jumped up, spun around, and saw nothing. My heart banged against my ribs. I looked down at the floor, searching for any sign of movement. The air felt strangely cold near the foot of the bed. My breath quickened. I backed away, stepped into the hall, and shut my bedroom door. I leaned against it, feeling my legs tremble. I realized I needed a plan. This thing, whatever it was, felt like it was trying to get my attention. I decided to stay calm and see if it would communicate in another way. I went downstairs again. My legs felt shaky and my palms were sweaty on the railing. I left all the lights on. The living room was still lit. The corridor lamp glowed. The kitchen felt bright. I sat at the kitchen table and waited. My stomach churned and my mind kept replaying the blur in the hallway. About an hour passed without any noises. I started to relax, but then the overhead light flickered a few times. I glanced up. The bulb stayed on, but I felt nervous. Then, from the direction of the living room, I heard another thump. It was soft, more like a muffled knock. I stood and walked into the living room. The lamp there was on, casting a warm glow over the couch and a small coffee table. I scanned the area. Nothing looked out of place. I noticed the door to a small closet under the stairs. It was slightly ajar. I remembered closing it earlier in the day. Now it was open by a few inches. I approached it, feeling my heart beating faster. I reached out and gripped the doorknob. My hand felt clammy. I pulled the door open and aimed my phone flashlight inside. There were a few shelves with cleaning supplies and some empty boxes. One box was on the floor, turned on its side. I knelt down. It was empty, but it looked as if something had moved it. I heard a faint rustling sound from behind the boxes. I shone the light there, but saw nothing. When I stood back up, I caught a glimpse of a shape in the reflection of the living room mirror on the wall to my left. It moved behind me, near the couch. I whipped around and pointed my phone's light in that direction. The couch was empty. My breathing became ragged. I thought I saw a human-like outline for a split second. It was as if something had crouched beside the couch. My eyes stung with fear, and my chest felt tight again. For a moment I froze. I listened for any sound of movement. The house stayed silent. Then, I felt a slight gust of air pass by my left shoulder. It was gentle, but it made my hair move. My pulse surged. I turned quickly, shining the flashlight around, but I saw only empty space. My mouth felt dry and I tried to swallow. My head throbbed with adrenaline. I decided I had to speak again. I said, "What do you want?" My voice shook. My hands trembled. I felt silly talking to empty air, but I had no other idea. A few seconds passed with no response. Then I heard a faint scratching sound on the wooden floor. It came from the corridor again. My stomach dropped. I walked over there step by step, feeling the boards under my feet. Near the entrance to the hallway, I saw faint marks on the floor. They looked fresh, like shallow scratches in the wood. I knelt and touched them. They were only surface scratches, but I hadn't noticed them before. I felt a chill in my arms. Something had done that. I stood up and looked into the corridor. My mouth felt sticky, and I had to breathe slowly to keep from panicking. I noticed a slight change in the air. It felt dense, as if the space was pressing in on me. I clenched my fists to steady myself. My heart beat so hard I could hear it. Then I saw the silhouette in front of me. It wasn't clear or solid. but I could see an outline that shifted slightly. It looked tall and thin. It swayed side to side, almost in a rhythmic pattern. I wanted to run, but my feet felt stuck. I stared at it, feeling my throat tighten. My mind raced with questions. I took one shaky step forward. The silhouette moved back, then slid along the wall. The lights in the corridor flickered. My hands felt clammy, and I let out a shaky breath. I thought it was trying to guide me somewhere. I followed it, step by step, until we reached the base of the staircase. Then it vanished. My arm shook as I stood there. I didn't know what it wanted, but I sensed it was trying to show me something. I heard a faint knock from above, somewhere on the second floor. My mind told me to go up, so I did. I climbed the stairs, feeling my legs tremble. The hallway light was still on. I turned toward the guest room. The door was closed. I could hear a soft shuffling noise inside. My palms were damp as I twisted the doorknob. I pushed the door open. The boxes I'd left there were scattered. One box had tipped over. Papers from inside were spread across the floor. They were blank pages I intended to use for notes. They were arranged in a strange pattern, as if something had moved them around. I stepped closer, looking at them. They formed a circle on the floor. My body tensed. Then I saw a single piece of paper pinned under the corner of a box. It had a few scribbled lines on it. They looked like random marks, but I realized they seemed deliberate. My stomach tightened, and my hand shook as I picked it up. The marks didn't form any recognizable words, but they felt like an attempt at writing. My scalp tingled. I turned around quickly, feeling I wasn't alone, but I saw no one. I had no doubt something was here. It made noises, left marks, and tried to communicate. My rational side wanted to leave, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I spent the rest of the night in the living room with every light on, waiting for dawn. I dozed off a few times, jerking awake whenever I heard a floorboard creak or a light flicker. My body was exhausted and my nerves were frayed. Now, as the sun rises, I'm sitting here trying to figure out my next move. I can't deny what's been happening. I can't ignore the sounds, the silhouettes, and the strange marks on the floor. This presence is real. I feel it in the air around me. My heart still races whenever I think about the shape in the hallway. I don't know why it's here, but it seems to want my attention. I wonder if it has more to show me. I'm afraid, but I also feel a need to understand it. My body is on edge and my mind is tired, but I'm not leaving yet. I came here for solitude and inspiration. I found something else. I'm going to see what happens tonight. I arrived at the old mansion on a rainy afternoon. The sky looked gray and the wind felt cold against my face. I carried a small backpack with a notebook, a flashlight, and a few snacks, but I left most of my luggage in the car. The house stood at the end of a long driveway surrounded by tall trees. The exterior walls had patches of peeling paint, and the windows seemed dark and empty. I came here for research, hoping to find inspiration for my next novel. People in town called this place haunted, and I wanted to see if there was any truth to their stories. I walked up the creaking steps to the front door. My heart pounded a little faster, and I felt a tingling in my stomach. The door was slightly ajar, so I pushed it open. It made a scraping sound against the floor. A musty smell hit me right away, like damp wood and old fabric. I stood in the foyer and let my eyes adjust to the dim light. The ceiling was high and there was a staircase to the left with broken balusters. Dust floated in the air. I heard water dripping somewhere deeper in the house. I turned on my flashlight. The beam revealed peeling wallpaper and a few old portraits on the walls. The people in the portraits looked stern, but the paint had faded so much that their faces seemed blurry. I took a few steps forward, and the floorboards groaned under my weight. My pulse sped up. I tried to keep my breathing steady, but the silence in the house made every small sound feel louder. I wanted to explore methodically, so I started in the foyer. I checked the walls, opened a small cabinet, and found nothing but an empty glass bottle. I tossed it aside and heard it clink on the floor. I felt jumpy, like I might see a figure in the corner of my eye at any moment. Still, I moved on. I went into what looked like a living room on the right. The room smelled stale, like old books and rotting wood. A heavy curtain hung over two large windows, blocking most of the outside light. I could see a couch with torn upholstery, a small table covered in dust, and a few shelves with books. My flashlight flickered across the titles, and I noticed some old novels and a few journals with worn covers. I picked up one of the journals and flipped through it. The pages had scribbles about daily life, notes on chores, references to visitors, and some sketches of the property. Nothing jumped out at me as a clue to any hidden secrets. Suddenly, I heard a soft thump from upstairs. I froze. I aimed my flashlight at the ceiling, and I stayed silent for a few seconds. My heart thudded in my chest. I waited, but I heard nothing else. I told myself it could be an animal moving around. Still, I felt uneasy. I decided to check it out. I left the living room, stepped back into the foyer, and approached the staircase. The steps felt unsteady, and each one made a low creak. The second-floor hallway was dark, except for a bit of gray light seeping in from a broken window at the far end. I smelled something bitter, like old varnish. I saw a corridor with several doors. The corridor was narrow, and my footsteps sounded hollow. I turned my flashlight to the left, then to the right, checking each closed door. My pulse kept racing, and my mouth felt dry. When I reached the first door on the right, I paused and listened. No sound came from inside. I tried the handle. It stuck for a moment, then turned, and the door opened with a groan. Inside, I found a small bedroom. The walls had cracks, and the bed frame was broken. A single chair leaned against the wall, covered in dust. I sniffed the air. It smelled like old sheets. I heard a faint rustling sound, and I held my breath. I aimed my flashlight at the corner of the room. Nothing there. The sound stopped. I left the room slowly and closed the door behind me. I continued down the hallway. I felt sweat gathering on my forehead, even though the air felt cool. My hands shook a little, and I tried to calm myself. I passed another closed door, then another. I reached the final door on the left, which stood slightly open. A flicker of movement passed in front of me, like a shadow across the crack in the door. My heart jumped. I gripped the handle, but it slipped in my sweaty palm. I steadied myself and pushed the door open. This room appeared to be some sort of study. There was a desk against the far wall, a bookshelf to the side, and a window covered by thick drapes. The air smelled stale, but I picked up the scent of old tobacco as well. The floor was littered with scraps of paper. I stepped inside and ran my flashlight beam across the desk. I saw a few letters spread out and a small lamp with a shattered bulb. I leaned in to read one of the letters. I keep hearing someone downstairs. The doors open and close, but I find no one. That single sentence made my skin crawl. It matched the uneasy feeling I had from the moment I stepped inside the house. I heard another noise out in the hallway, like a slow drag across the floor. My chest tightened. I put the letter down and stepped toward the door, shining my flashlight into the dark corridor. The corridor was empty, but I felt a presence. I felt eyes on me, even though I saw no one. I stayed still for a moment, listening for more. The air felt thick, and my breathing became shallow. I decided to speak. My voice sounded shaky. "Hello? Is anyone here?" I waited. No response. Just the drip of water and the hum of the wind outside. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. I backed out of the study, thinking I should check the next room or maybe go back downstairs to get some air. I turned to face the hallway, and something moved near the staircase. It was a faint shape, like a blur. I blinked and aimed my flashlight, but the shape was gone. My stomach churned and a rush of adrenaline pumped through my veins. I forced myself to walk forward. The floor creaked under my boots. Each step felt heavier than the last. When I reached the staircase, I peered down. The foyer looked different in the gloomy light. I thought I heard whispering, but it was too low to understand. My pulse pounded in my ears and my breathing became quicker. I kept shining the flashlight around, expecting to catch a glimpse of someone. I saw only the dusty floor, the peeling walls, and the battered front door. I decided to keep exploring. I felt drawn to the house, like I had to unravel its secrets. I walked down the stairs. Each step echoed. I felt dizzy for a moment, but I gripped the banister and pressed on. When I reached the bottom floor, I aimed my flashlight toward a hallway in the back. It led to the kitchen, I guessed, or maybe a storage area. I had read in some local records that this mansion had a large kitchen and a cellar. I made my way through the hallway. The walls here were covered in more peeling wallpaper, and the smell changed. It reminded me of mold and something sour. My heart thumped in my chest and my shoulders felt tense. At the end of the hallway, I found a door that led to a large kitchen. I stepped inside. The counters were covered in dust and bits of plaster. A sink near the window was rusted. Old pots and pans lay scattered on a wooden table. I heard a scuttling noise, probably rats. I swallowed hard and moved deeper into the room. A few chairs stood around the table. One was on its side. I saw a narrow door next to the pantry. I figured it might lead to the cellar. My flashlight beam showed a small flight of stairs descending into darkness. The air flowing from below felt damp and smelled like earth and rotted wood. I hesitated, but I felt a strange need to see what lay down there. I stepped onto the first stair. The steps were cold and uneven. My breathing grew shallow again. As I went down, each step sank under my weight, and I worried one might break. I kept going, shining my flashlight along the stone walls. Finally, I reached the cellar. The ceiling was low. I felt like I had to stoop a bit. The floor was packed dirt with some loose stones. I noticed crates, barrels, and some old shelves with glass jars. Most jars were empty. A few contained dark, unrecognizable lumps that looked decades old. The smell made me gag. I took a step away from them. I began checking the walls, trying to see if there was any hidden doorway or compartment. I found nothing but cobwebs and dust. Then I heard a scraping noise behind me. It sounded like a foot dragging across the dirt. I spun around, shining my flashlight. No one was there. My pulse raced and I felt a drop of sweat run down my temple. I swallowed and tried to stay calm, but my thoughts raced. I wondered if I was losing my grip. I shook that off and tried to focus on the facts. I heard a sound, but I didn't see anything. The cellar was small, so there wasn't much room for someone to hide, but I felt watched. My hands trembled, and my flashlight beam wavered. I started backing away toward the stairs. My heart pounded so hard it almost hurt. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw a shape drift across the far end of the cellar. It was pale, barely more than a distortion. I jerked the flashlight in that direction, but it was gone. My chest tightened and I felt a surge of fear. I sprinted up the stairs two at a time, not caring about the noise I made. Back in the kitchen, I slammed the cellar door shut. My breathing came in quick bursts and my legs felt shaky. I leaned against the wall, pressing my forehead to the peeling wallpaper. I closed my eyes for a moment. The house felt alive with movement and sounds that I couldn't explain. I tried to pull myself together, reminding myself I came here to gather material for a novel. But I felt less like a writer and more like a trespasser in someone else's domain. I decided to return to the foyer and consider my next move. I didn't want to leave without more information, but part of me wanted to run out the door and never come back. I walked slowly through the hallway, shining my flashlight in every corner. My ears caught every small creak, every shift in the structure. Near the foyer, the whispering started again. It sounded faint but urgent. It rose and fell like several voices speaking at once. I aimed my flashlight around, seeing nothing but dust and shadows. I swallowed hard. My chest felt tight. The sound made my scalp tingle. Then a sudden pressure descended on me. My breathing felt labored. My head throbbed. I thought I saw movement near the staircase again, like a figure gliding across the landing. I pointed my flashlight at it. Nothing. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I felt short of breath, like the air was too heavy. My instincts told me I was not safe here. I pushed forward, stumbling toward the front door. My hand shook as I reached for the doorknob. I turned it, ready to step outside, but something made me look over my shoulder. My flashlight illuminated the foyer. There, in the corner near the base of the stairs, I saw a shape again. It looked like a hunched figure for a split second. Then it vanished. My breath caught in my throat. A rush of dread filled me. I grabbed the door handle again, yanked the door open, and stepped outside onto the porch. The cool rain hit my face, and I gasped. My heart still hammered, and my clothes felt damp with sweat. I stood there, panting, shining my flashlight back into the house through the open door. The interior looked quiet, as if everything I experienced had melted back into the darkness. But I still felt that tightness in my chest, that sensation of being watched. I wanted to leave, but curiosity nagged at me. I had only scratched the surface of the mansion. There might be more rooms, more documents, something that would give my novel a real edge. My mind raced with thoughts of the shadows and the voices. I weighed my options. Finally, I decided to take a break outside. I needed to catch my breath and clear my head. I walked off the porch and made my way to the car, which was parked at the far end of the driveway. The rain had softened the ground, and my shoes sank into the mud. My flashlight beam caught the glistening surface of the wet leaves. The wind rustled the branches above me. My body still felt tense, and my pulse was still high. As I reached the car, I realized I was soaking wet. My hair stuck to my forehead, and my jacket felt heavy. I opened the car door and sat behind the wheel, but I didn't start the engine. I took a few deep breaths. My hands shook. My mind reeled with questions about what I had just experienced. I asked myself if I imagined those shapes, if my fear had made me see things that weren't there. But I heard the footsteps. I heard the whispers. I couldn't dismiss that so easily. After a few minutes, I felt my heartbeat slow down a bit. I decided to record my observations in my notebook. I wrote down everything. The sounds, the shapes, the letters I found, the smell in the cellar, and the thick feeling in the air. As I wrote, I felt a chill spread through my body. I realized I was shivering. I turned on the car's engine for a moment, letting the heater run so I could warm up. Then I switched it off again, worried about draining the battery. I stared at the dark shape of the mansion. The windows still looked empty, but I kept expecting a face to appear. I saw no movement outside. The house stood there, silent and imposing, surrounded by tall trees that swayed in the wind. I felt the urge to go back inside, to push further. I wanted to find the source of the voices, to see if I could uncover the mansion's hidden story. But the fear in my gut told me I should quit while I still felt sane. I stayed in the car for a long time, unsure of my decision. My head ached, and my ears still buzzed with the memory of those whispers. Eventually, I decided that I had enough for one day. I started the engine again, letting the headlights light up the driveway. My hands felt steady enough to drive, but I still had a knot in my stomach. I looked at the mansion one more time. The rain fell steadily, and the driveway turned into a shallow puddle in places. I pulled away, feeling a strange mix of relief and disappointment. As I drove back toward the main road, I couldn't stop thinking about the voices, the footsteps, and those fleeting shapes. My mind raced with possibilities. I planned to return with better equipment, maybe with someone else, to see if I could capture evidence of what roamed those halls. But that night, I just wanted to get out of there and clear my head. I don't know if I saw ghosts, or if the isolation and darkness played tricks on my mind. All I know is that the house felt alive with sounds and movements I couldn't explain. My skin prickled whenever I thought about that shape in the cellar and the whispering that followed me in the hallway. Even now, hours later, I feel unsettled. My chest tightens when I recall the way the air felt thick pressing in on me. I wonder if the mansion holds real spirits, or if my mind conjured those things. I have no proof, only my notes and my memories. But I plan to return. I need answers, even if I'm terrified of what I might find. I got the deed to the mansion last fall. I remember the day I received the letter from my lawyer. He told me I had inherited the property from a distant relative. I never met that relative in person, but he left me this place in his will. At first I felt excited. A large estate can open a lot of possibilities. I had plans to renovate it and maybe sell it. But once I arrived and settled in, I realized there was something else here. I started noticing strange sounds in the hallways, doors that seemed to shift on their own, and a feeling that I wasn't alone. I tried to ignore these things at first, but they kept happening. Now, I can't pretend it's my imagination. Something moves in the house at night and sometimes even during the day. I don't know if it means me harm, but it makes my chest tighten every time I sense it. I drove to the property on a warm afternoon. The sun was out, and the sky was clear. The driveway was long and had tall trees on both sides. The mansion stood at the end of that path, looking weathered. The paint on the exterior was peeling, and there was moss around the stone foundation. When I stepped out of my car, I noticed how quiet it was. No birds, no wind, nothing. I heard only the crunch of gravel under my shoes. I got my suitcase from the trunk and walked up the front steps. Inside, the foyer looked bigger than I expected. A wide staircase led up to the second floor. There were tall windows along the walls, and I saw dust floating in the beams of light. The floorboards creaked under my weight. The air smelled stale, like the place had been shut for years. I explored the first floor for a few minutes. I found a large living room with old furniture covered in sheets. I found a dining room with a heavy wooden table that looked warped in some places. I opened a door to a back hallway and saw a kitchen that seemed stuck in an earlier decade. The appliances were old, and the counters showed stains that must have been there for a long time. I went back to the foyer and carried my suitcase up the stairs to find a bedroom for myself. Most of the doors upstairs were shut. I opened one door at the end of the corridor and saw a spacious bedroom with an attached bathroom. The bed had a wooden frame, and there was a thick layer of dust on the mattress. I spent some time wiping the surfaces and sweeping the floor. I opened the windows to let in fresh air. While I cleaned, I heard faint sounds downstairs. It sounded like soft steps. I figured maybe an animal had gotten inside, so I hurried down to check. I looked around the foyer and the living room. No one was there. I heard no scurrying or scraping. The place felt empty again. I went back upstairs. That night I set up a cot in the bedroom because I didn't trust the old mattress. I brought in a lamp for better lighting. The overhead fixture in the room flickered, so I decided not to use it. I lay down around 10. I wanted to sleep early so I could start organizing the property in the morning. Around midnight I woke up with my heart pounding. I sat up and listened. I heard distant footsteps again. They weren't loud, but they had a steady beat, like someone pacing in a hallway. My mouth felt dry, and my arms felt tense. I turned on my lamp and walked to the door. I pressed my ear against it and tried to pick up the direction of the steps. They sounded like they were coming from the right side of the corridor. I opened the door. The hallway was dark, so I turned on the flashlight on my phone. I saw nothing. I slowly walked down the corridor, shining the light on the floor and the walls. My heart was still racing. I looked behind me once or twice, worried that I might see a shape or a person. I reached the end of the hallway and checked a small guest room. It was empty. The windows were shut, and the curtains were still. I stood there for a moment, breathing heavily. The footsteps had stopped. I heard only the sound of my breathing and the faint hum of my phone's flashlight. I shook my head and went back to my room. I locked the door and crawled onto the cot. I didn't fall back asleep right away, but I eventually dozed off from sheer exhaustion. The next morning, I tried to make sense of what happened. I told myself it could have been an echo from my own footsteps. It could also have been the house settling at night. Old buildings make strange noises, especially when the temperature changes. But there was a tension in my shoulders that wouldn't go away. I spent the day cleaning more rooms and checking the electrical wiring. The property had old fuse boxes. Some of the lights flickered or didn't work. I made notes on what needed repairs. I looked at the old family portraits in the upstairs gallery. The paintings showed ancestors in formal clothing, sitting in chairs or standing in front of old backdrops. Their eyes seemed to follow me. I touched the frames. The wood felt cold and smooth. There was a thick layer of dust on top of each one. I felt uneasy. I tried to focus on the tasks at hand. At around 2 p.m., I heard a door slam shut somewhere on the first floor. I jumped at the sound. I left the gallery and hurried downstairs. I found the front door open, though I was sure I had closed it earlier. The wind outside didn't seem strong enough to blow it open. My pulse sped up and my hand started to sweat. I closed the door again and double-checked the lock. It felt loose. I decided to wedge a chair against it for extra security. Later in the afternoon, I went to the study at the far end of the first floor. I wanted to examine the furniture and see if there were any important documents left behind. The study had tall shelves filled with dusty books. There was a heavy wooden desk near the window. On the desk, I found old letters and a ledger. The ledger listed expenses for the house, along with some notes about staff wages. The last entry was from several decades ago. The handwriting was neat and consistent. I flipped through the letters, but most of them seemed ordinary. Bills, business correspondence, and a few personal notes that mentioned events around the house. I saw references to gatherings that took place on the property. The letters were vague, mentioning private meetings and late-night discussions. I started to feel uneasy again. I didn't see any direct mention of something supernatural, but there was an odd tone to the words. Some lines described observances and pledges. They sounded formal, almost ceremonial. At sunset, I went to the kitchen to prepare something simple for dinner. I had brought supplies, so I made a sandwich and poured a glass of water. The plumbing worked, but the water had a metallic taste. I made a mental note to get it tested. I ate quickly, feeling anxious. While I chewed, I heard a low murmur coming from somewhere in the house. It wasn't a voice I recognized, but it sounded like hushed speech. I swallowed my food and walked out of the kitchen holding my plate. I tried to trace the direction of the sound. It seemed to come from the hallway near the dining room. I flipped on the light switch, but the bulb in that hallway was dead. I stood in the doorway listening. My legs felt weak and my stomach tightened. The murmur continued for a few seconds, then stopped. I walked slowly down the hallway, flicking on my phone's flashlight again. The floor felt cold through my socks. I peeked into the dining room. The chairs around the table were covered in sheets. Nothing moved. The tall windows reflected my light, and I saw my own face in the glass. I looked pale and nervous. I spoke out loud. "Hello?" My voice echoed a little. I waited, but no one answered. I moved farther into the room. I gripped my phone tightly, worried about dropping it. I looked around the corners, behind the curtains, under the table. Nothing. The house was still, but my pulse kept pounding. I felt sweat on the back of my neck. I didn't like this feeling. I never had any real problems with old houses before, but this one gave me a constant sense of dread. I went upstairs again and locked myself in the bedroom. I read through some more of the letters I had found. The text described gatherings that might have been small parties, but they didn't sound casual. They mentioned repeated rituals, and the writer warned about secrecy. The writer also referenced a room in the basement. I hadn't gone down there yet. The thought of exploring the basement made my breathing shallow, but I needed to check it at some point. That night, I barely slept. Every noise, every creak, made me sit up on the cot. I imagined shapes outside my door. I heard soft tapping sounds, but I couldn't pinpoint their source. My body stayed tense, and I kept my phone close to me. Eventually, I drifted off for a couple of hours. The next day, I decided to explore the basement. I didn't want to go down there in the evening, so I did it in the late morning when the daylight felt stronger. I found the basement door near the kitchen. It was locked, and the key was on a ring I found in one of the desk drawers. I unlocked it and flicked on the single light bulb hanging above the stairwell. The wooden steps creaked with each step I took. The air smelled damp. The basement was chilly, and I felt goosebumps on my arms. At the bottom, I saw a concrete floor and walls lined with old shelves. Some shelves held tools, paint cans, and cleaning supplies. Others were empty. There was a small corridor branching off to the left, leading to a closed door. I approached it, feeling my heart rate go up. I turned the knob and pushed. The door opened, revealing a narrow room. The light from the corridor barely reached inside, so I used my flashlight. I saw a few chairs arranged in a circle. In the center was a wooden stand with an empty bowl. The floor had markings scratched into the concrete. They looked like circles and lines crossing each other. I knelt to get a closer look. The markings didn't seem random. They looked planned. The lines were carved with some kind of sharp tool. I touched one with my fingertip. It was rough. I stood up again, feeling uneasy. I left the room and closed the door behind me. I felt pressure in my chest. My breathing was shallow. My gut told me people used that space for some kind of ceremony. I pictured them sitting on the chairs, passing around the bowl, chanting or whispering. I didn't know what they did, but it didn't feel harmless. I hurried up the stairs and locked the basement door. I decided to leave it that way unless I absolutely needed to go back. That afternoon, I walked around the property to get some fresh air and clear my head. The backyard had overgrown grass and a few tall hedges. There was a greenhouse on the west side, but it looked collapsed in some sections. The glass panels were shattered in places. I looked back at the mansion. It stood silent, with its windows reflecting the sky. I felt a chill just looking at it. I still had a decision to make. I could hire a team to renovate, or I could sell it as is. But something told me it wouldn't be that easy. I made a phone call to a contractor I knew. I asked him to stop by in a few days to check the structure. He agreed, though he said he was busy and might be delayed. I thought having someone else around would help. I felt nervous being alone in this place, but I also felt determined to understand what was happening. That night, I woke up again to footsteps. They were heavier this time. I also heard a faint scraping noise like wood against wood. I got up, grabbed the flashlight, and opened my bedroom door. The corridor was dark, but I saw a hint of movement near the gallery of family portraits. My heart pounded, and I moved slowly toward that area. I saw a shape at the end of the corridor. It was human-sized. It vanished around the corner. I froze for a moment, trying to decide if I should follow. My thoughts were racing, and I could hear my own breathing echo in my ears. I forced myself to move forward. My legs felt weak, and my palms were slick with sweat. When I reached the end of the corridor, I heard a door close again, but I couldn't see which one. I checked 3 doors. One led to a closet, one led to a small bathroom, and one opened to a storage room. All were empty. I stood there, flashlight trembling in my hand. The air felt colder. I decided I couldn't handle more searching in the dark. I went back to my room, shut the door, and braced a chair under the knob. I sat on my cot, waiting for morning. My chest was tight and my head started to ache from stress. I felt like something was watching me from behind the walls. I listened for more sounds, but only silence remained. I stayed that way until dawn, barely blinking. The next morning, I packed a bag. I couldn't spend another night in that mansion without backup. I decided to drive into town, stay at a motel, and return later with someone who could help me figure this out. As I left the house and locked the front door, I felt a surge of relief. The tension in my chest let up a little. When I got into my car, I looked back at the mansion one more time. Part of me wanted to leave it behind forever, but I knew I still had a responsibility to handle the inheritance. Whether it meant selling, renovating, or investigating further, I had to come back eventually. But in that moment, I just wanted to be somewhere else. I turned the key, started the engine, and drove away, feeling my shoulders loosen with every mile I put between me and that silent, watchful place. I never thought I would question my own mind until I began living in this house. I moved here a few months ago, hoping for a quiet place where I could focus on work and enjoy some space away from noisy neighbors. From the outside, everything looked perfectly ordinary. White walls, a small porch, a fenced backyard, and simple furniture I arranged myself. The first few weeks went by without any problem. I cooked, watched TV, and sometimes fell asleep on the couch when I stayed up too late. But then, small things started happening. I heard faint tapping sounds from rooms I wasn't using. I saw flickers of movement in the corner of my eye when I was sure I was alone. At first, I told myself it was just the house settling, or my eyes playing tricks on me. But those excuses stopped making sense when the noises became more persistent and the shadows seemed to stay in my peripheral vision for longer periods. I work from home most days, so I spend a lot of time alone here. My schedule is pretty regular. I wake up around 7, brew coffee, check some emails, and start my job. During the day, the house feels normal. The walls and floors don't creak as often. The temperature stays consistent. I can move around from room to room without sensing anything unusual. But something shifts in the evenings. It begins around dinner time. The air feels slightly heavier. My shoulders tense up. There's a general awareness in my gut that tells me I'm not alone, even though I don't see anyone. It's like the house is watching me. But I don't hear voices or anything that obvious. It's just a pressure, something that makes me check over my shoulder every now and then. A few days ago, I sat on the couch after finishing a late meal. I was flipping through channels, trying to find something to watch before going to bed. My eyes felt tired, and I noticed a reflection on the TV screen. It looked like a silhouette behind me, near the hallway entrance. I didn't turn around right away, I just froze, staring at that shape. It was a dark form, kind of a shadow that extended vertically, as if someone tall was standing there. My heart started pounding. My palms got sweaty. For about 3 seconds, I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was just the reflection of something else in the room. Then, slowly, I twisted around to look. Nobody was there. The hall was empty. When I looked back at the TV screen, the silhouette was gone. I turned off the TV and went straight to my bedroom. I turned on every light on the way there. That night, I slept with the hallway light on. The following morning, I felt stupid for getting so scared. I brushed my teeth, took a shower, and tried to laugh about it, but I couldn't shake off that feeling of being watched. I heard faint shuffling noises in the living room while I was in the bathroom. It sounded like footsteps dragging across the floor. I stopped the shower and listened. The noise lasted maybe 5 seconds. Then everything went quiet. When I went to check, the living room was still. My curtains were closed, and the furniture was the way I left it. I moved around looking for something out of place, but I didn't find anything. My heart kept thumping for a while after that. I tried to be rational. I inspected the windows to see if there were any drafts that could cause random sounds. I checked the floorboards to see if they were loose or if the house was just old. Everything seemed normal. My desk is in a small room near the front door. I sat there and typed up some notes for work, glancing occasionally at the hallway. Nothing moved, but I felt on edge. That night I decided to go to bed early. I took some melatonin to help me sleep, hoping to avoid any weird sensations in the middle of the night. I closed my bedroom door and locked it. I don't usually lock it, but I felt the need to have a barrier between me and the rest of the house. A few hours later, I woke up to a faint scraping noise. It sounded like nails against wood. I opened my eyes and realized it was coming from the other side of the bedroom door. The hairs on my arms stood up. My breathing became quick and shallow. I was lying there in the dark, staring at the door, wondering if I should get up or pretend I was still asleep. My phone was on the nightstand, so I grabbed it and turned on the flashlight. The noise stopped as soon as I pointed the light toward the door. My heart pounded so hard I could feel my chest tightening. I stayed like that for a while, flashlight aimed at the door, waiting to hear something else. The house was silent. Eventually I got up, turned on the bedroom light and walked over. I unlocked and opened the door with my hand trembling a bit. The hallway looked empty. The air felt colder than usual. My feet felt the chill on the floorboards. I peeked left and right, flipping on the hallway light. There was no one around. I didn't see any marks on the door. I checked the doorknob. It was sturdy. I closed the door again and locked it, then stayed awake for the rest of the night, scrolling through my phone and occasionally turning on some music to break the silence. After that incident, I considered calling someone to stay with me for a few days. But I didn't want to look like a fool. I'm a grown man and I felt embarrassed to say, "Hey, I think my house is doing weird stuff at night." Instead, I tried to approach it logically. I I bought a small camera and set it up in the living room to record anything at night. I placed it on a shelf facing the main area and the hallway leading to my bedroom. The first night I caught some weird audio, small knocks and a few random clicks. I didn't see anything on the video though, just my empty living room in low light. The second night I heard something like faint footsteps on the audio track and a slight flicker of the overhead light on the video. But no figure or shape appeared. I checked everything in the house for loose wiring but couldn't find a reason for that flicker. I started sleeping with a flashlight beside me. I took to double-checking every door and window before bed. I even checked behind the shower curtain in the bathroom at night because I felt a constant sense of unease. One evening, I tried to ignore my nerves by making dinner as usual. I chopped vegetables and grilled some chicken. The kitchen light began to dim and brighten on its own. It wasn't a complete flicker, more like a slow fade in and out. My heart pounded, and I kept looking up at the light fixture, trying to see if it was a loose bulb. I tightened the bulb, but the dimming continued for a few more seconds, then stopped. The rest of the night, the light stayed normal. A couple of days later, I was reading in bed around 10 p.m. The house was quiet. I had the window slightly open to let in some air. Then I heard a faint humming sound like an electronic buzz coming from the hallway. I put my book down and listened. The sound grew louder, then it cut off abruptly. I walked over to the hallway with the flashlight. I didn't see anything. I aimed the flashlight at the walls, looking for an electrical outlet that might be malfunctioning. Everything appeared fine. But then I heard a low thump behind me, in the direction of my bedroom. I spun around and shined the light. Nothing was there. That's when I noticed my bedroom door slowly moving, as if it had been nudged. My stomach dropped. I took a deep breath and stepped into the room. No one was inside. I felt the sweat on my forehead. My legs felt unsteady. I checked the window to see if a breeze had pushed the door. The window was barely open, and the door was too heavy to move like that from a small draft. I closed the window completely and tested the door myself, swinging it back and forth to see how it moved. It took some effort to move it, so it wasn't the wind. I stood there, feeling my pulse race. I decided to keep the door open so I could see down the hallway while I tried to get back into bed. That night, I must have slept in short bursts of 20 or 30 minutes at a time. Every small creak or tap made my heart jolt. The situation escalated about a week later. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of something scraping against the walls in the living room. It wasn't loud, but it was consistent, like someone moving a piece of furniture very slowly. I grabbed the flashlight and forced myself to go check. My body was tense and my throat felt dry. When I reached the living room, I turned on the main light. My couch was shifted a few inches from where it normally sat, angled slightly toward the TV. I was sure I hadn't left it that way. My hands shook as I walked around the couch looking for any sign of a break-in. The front door was locked and the windows were closed. Nothing else looked disturbed. I pushed the couch back to its usual place, then stood there, breathing hard, trying to figure out who or what could have moved it. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. Instead, I sat in the armchair across from the couch, keeping the lights on, waiting for something else to happen. My eyes kept scanning the corners of the room, expecting to see a shadow or movement. Around 4 a.m., I heard a faint click in the hallway, but nothing else happened. When the sun finally rose, I felt slightly relieved. The normal daylight made the house look ordinary again, like nothing strange had ever occurred. By now, every evening puts me on edge. Around sunset, I feel my pulse start to climb. My muscles tighten. I find myself pacing around the house, checking each room, turning lights on, turning them off, trying to see if the environment changes. Sometimes I stand in the hallway, holding my breath, listening for any sign of footsteps or scratching. I've heard them more times than I can count, but I can never pinpoint the exact location. They echo through the rooms, sometimes above me, sometimes behind a wall. I started to think about leaving the house entirely. But I invested time and money here, and part of me wants to figure out what's going on. I called an electrician who did a quick check of my wiring. He found nothing unusual. He tested the circuit breaker and every light switch, telling me everything looked fine. He left, and I didn't mention anything about footsteps or moving shadows. I didn't want to sound irrational. A few nights ago, I tried to stand my ground in the living room with all the lights off. I had my phone's flashlight ready, but I kept it off to see if the shadows would appear more clearly. At first, I only heard the typical creaks of the house, but after a few minutes, the room felt like it got colder. My arms broke out in goosebumps, and the tiny hairs on my neck stood up. Then, in the reflection of the turned-off TV screen, I saw a dark outline on the opposite side of the couch. It moved slightly, like it shifted position. My heart started pounding. I flicked on my phone flashlight and aimed it at that spot. Nothing was there, but I swear I could still feel a presence. My breathing got shallow, and I felt sweat gathering on my temples. I stood there, paralyzed for a moment, then backed out of the room. I nearly tripped over the edge of the carpet as I hurried down the hallway. I locked myself in my bedroom again. I've been living like this for a few weeks now. I try to function normally during the day. I do my work, eat my meals, and even try to watch a movie or two. But as soon as the sun starts going down, the tension creeps in. The house's normal sounds become suspicious. Every tap or creak sets me on edge. I keep my phone charged and close by, but I've never actually called anyone for help during the night. I keep telling myself there's some logical explanation. Still, I can't find it. Last night, something new happened. I was lying in bed, drifting off around midnight. My eyes were closed and I was trying not to focus on random noises. Then I felt the mattress sink slightly on the other side, as if someone had sat down. My eyes shot open, and I froze. The blankets were pulling tighter against my body, like there was weight on them. I held my breath, feeling sheer panic spread through my chest. After a few seconds, that pressure disappeared. I grabbed my phone, turned the flashlight on, and shined it around the bed. It was empty. The door was still locked. My stomach churned and I felt a jolt of nausea. I got out of bed, opened the door, and practically ran to the living room. I sat on the couch with all the lights on. I didn't sleep at all. I just sat there until morning, occasionally dozing off for a minute or two, only to jerk awake with my heart racing. I don't know what's happening here. I see no evidence of an intruder. I've set up cameras, checked the locks, and inspected the entire house multiple times. But the strange movements, the noises, and the chilling presence persist. It's affecting me physically. I feel restless, and my eyes are always scanning corners. My ears are always listening for the next sound of movement or scraping. My appetite is smaller, because I feel a constant pit in my stomach. Sometimes I even consider packing a bag and going to a motel just to get a full night's rest. That's where things stand right now. I'm writing this around midday when everything feels somewhat normal. But tonight I'll hear footsteps again. I'll see shapes that aren't there when I turn on the lights. I'll lock my bedroom door, but I'll still hear something scratching or dragging in the hallway. I'll probably feel that pressure on the mattress again, or see the couch out of place, or notice the lights flicker at random. And I'll be stuck listening to my own heartbeat and wondering if I'm slowly losing my mind or if this house really is alive. I don't have answers, but I do know that whatever is happening here is impossible to ignore. The place I call home is no longer a safe space. It's a place full of unexplained sounds and shadows that make my skin crawl, and I can't deny that something is here with me every single night. I stepped out of my truck and felt a strange thickness in the air. My lungs tightened as I took that first breath. The cabin stood about 30 yards away, hidden behind tall pine trees and surrounded by damp leaves. There was a thin layer of fog around the trunks and the sky looked gray and heavy. I wanted to be alone. I wanted quiet. I had no plan other than to clear my head, write in my journal a bit, and sit by the fireplace in the evenings. I never expected to sense something that would keep me on edge for days. I never expected to question whether I was truly alone out there. I walked up to the cabin with my bag over one shoulder and a small cooler in my left hand. The steps creaked. The board seemed fragile, but I tried to ignore that feeling of uncertainty. The front door stuck a little when I pushed, and it made a scraping sound across the floor. Inside, I saw a table, two chairs, a small kitchen counter, a sink with a rusty faucet, and a short hallway leading to a single bedroom. Everything smelled of damp wood and old dust. My nostrils stung. I set the cooler by the table, dropped my bag in the corner, and took a few seconds to catch my breath. My mind was bouncing between relief and unease. I told myself I would feel better once I settled in. I checked the windows, testing the latches. Some were loose. I shrugged and pulled them tight. I wasn't expecting anyone, but I liked feeling secure. The cabin had only one lock on the front door, a cheap deadbolt. I tried it a few times to make sure it didn't jam. Late in the afternoon, I took a quick walk around the perimeter of the cabin. The ground was soggy and the smell of rotting leaves filled the air. There was a thick blanket of vegetation on every side, except for a narrow path leading deeper into the woods. I heard a faint rustling among the trees. I couldn't see anything moving, but the hair on my arms stood up. It felt too quiet, but every so often, I heard a faint crack of a branch. I thought it might be squirrels or birds. Still, my stomach felt tight. That first night, I lit a small fire in the fireplace. The flames snapped and the warmth felt good on my face. Outside, the wind picked up. I could hear it whistling through the gaps in the window frames. I ate a can of soup, sipping it straight from the pot. My back ached from the stiff chair, but I tried to relax. I stared at the flickering light on the log walls and hoped for a sense of peace. I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a window pane. My own eyes looked distant and tense. I heard a soft sound outside, like a low whisper. I froze. I held my breath and listened. After a few seconds, there was nothing. I let out the air in my lungs, telling myself it was just the wind. I woke up around 3 a.m. because I needed some water. The bedroom was stuffy, so I opened the door and walked into the main room. The dying embers in the fireplace gave off a dull glow, just enough to see the outline of the table and chairs. Then I heard it again, some sort of murmur, very faint and low, coming through the back wall of the cabin. I stopped in my tracks. My eyes darted around the room, looking for movement. I stayed silent, my heart pounding. My scalp tingled. My hands started to shake a bit. Then I realized I was just standing there, half awake, holding my breath. I forced myself to take slow, quiet steps toward the back window. I tried to look outside, but all I saw was the reflection of my own face, pale and tense. The whispering sound had stopped. I stood there for a minute with my chest tight. Then I decided to fill my glass with water, swallow it quickly, and return to bed. I wondered if maybe I'd imagined the whole thing, but I couldn't shake the unease in my gut. The next morning I woke up late. I made coffee on the old stove and opened the windows to let some fresh air in. The day felt damp and chilly, but at least it was brighter. I ate a protein bar for breakfast, then stepped outside to check around the cabin. I noticed a set of footprints in the mud near the back. They weren't mine. They were pressed into the soft ground. They looked human, maybe from heavy boots. I followed them for a few yards, but they disappeared among the leaves. My arms tensed and I kept turning my head in every direction. I felt watched, even though I didn't see a soul out there. I stared at the tree line for a while, wondering if someone else was in the woods. I spent the rest of the day carrying in extra firewood from a small shed behind the cabin. The logs were damp and my gloves got soaked. My back and shoulders burned from the effort. I kept hearing little snaps in the woods, and every time I stopped to listen, it went silent. I started feeling angry at the tension in my own body. My throat was tight, and I kept swallowing to ease the feeling. I wanted to shout at whatever was out there, but I stayed quiet. I decided to keep the door locked even during the day. It felt silly, but it also felt necessary. By the second night, the temperature dropped. I lit the fireplace early. I sat by the flames with a flashlight by my side and a heavy blanket over my knees. Around 9 p.m., I heard that faint whispering again. It drifted through the cracks in the windows like a low chant. My skin prickled. My heart hammered in my chest. I told myself it had to be the wind or some odd echo from the trees, but there was a pattern to the sound. It rose and fell in a way that felt deliberate. I stood up, grabbed my flashlight, and opened the front door. The air hit my face with a cold slap. I aimed the flashlight around the porch, the steps, the area under the cabin's eaves. I saw nothing. Then I pointed it out into the darkness between the trees. I glimpsed movement. It was a silhouette, maybe 6 or 7 yards away, standing behind thick trunks. I jerked the flashlight to focus on it, but the light caught nothing but bark. My heart raced. My palms felt clammy. I clenched my teeth to stop them from chattering. I kept the flashlight steady, hoping to catch another glimpse. The wind rattled the branches overhead, but the silhouette was gone. I started to walk off the porch, but my legs felt too shaky. I could almost feel eyes on me, but I had no proof of anything. So I backed inside and locked the door again. I placed a chair under the doorknob like I'd seen in old movies. My breathing was rough. I paced for a while, then sat at the table. My mind was spinning. I tapped my fingers on the wood. The chanting had stopped, or at least I couldn't hear it anymore. But I couldn't stop thinking about the shape I'd seen. My hands trembled when I tried to sip some water. I eventually crawled into bed, but I stayed awake for hours, listening to the wind brush against the walls. My back felt damp with sweat, and every little creak in the cabin made me flinch. On the third day, I woke up feeling exhausted. My eyes stung. The sky outside looked gray again, and a light drizzle pelted the roof. I decided to take a short walk on that narrow path I had seen earlier. My plan was to see if there was a stream or a clearing. I put on a jacket, boots, and a hat, then headed out with my flashlight tucked in my belt. The path was overgrown, and wet branches slapped my face and arms as I tried to push through. After about 15 minutes, I came across a small clearing with a ring of stones in the center. I didn't see any ashes or signs of a recent campfire, but the stones were arranged in a neat circle. That immediately set me on edge. The hair on the back of my neck rose. I squatted next to the stones and inspected them. They looked stained with something brown and crusty. I touched one with a finger and felt a sticky residue. I yanked my hand away and wiped it on the grass. My stomach churned. There was a damp smell, a mix of wet soil, and something else that made me wince. I tried to stand up, but I heard a quick burst of whispers behind me. It felt like a dozen voices blending into one. My pulse throbbed in my ears. I spun around with my flashlight in hand, but I saw only trees. My breathing got loud and uneven. I started backing away from the stones, trying to keep my eyes on every direction at once. My mind screamed at me to run. I hurried back toward the cabin, stumbling over slippery roots and rocks. I nearly fell a few times. My jacket got torn on a branch. I didn't care. I just wanted to get indoors. When I finally reached the cabin's porch, I was panting so hard my throat ached. I slammed the door shut behind me and locked it. My legs felt weak. I set my forehead against the wall and tried to slow my breathing. For a while, I just stood there, gripping the doorframe, feeling the cold sweat trickle down my back. I didn't know what that sticky residue was, and I didn't want to speculate. My mouth felt dry and my hands were shaking nonstop. I decided to stay inside for the rest of the day. I kept the fireplace going, even though it wasn't that cold, just to have some comfort. I left all the lights on. I paced from one corner of the cabin to another, checking the windows every so often. Outside, the drizzle kept falling. It tapped against the roof in a rhythm that never seemed to let up. I kept thinking about the footprints I saw, the whispering voices, and that silhouette behind the trees. My mind kept replaying those few seconds of seeing movement in the beam of my flashlight. My body felt tense, like a coil about to snap. In the late afternoon, I dozed off on the armchair near the fire. I jolted awake to the sound of something scratching against the side of the cabin. I grabbed the poker from the fireplace and stood up, my knees trembling. The noise came from the rear wall. It was a scraping sound that lasted for a few seconds, then stopped. I held the poker like a bat and crept toward the bedroom window. I parted the curtain just enough to peek out. The light was dim, but I could see the wet ground outside. There was no one there, or at least I didn't see anything. Then the scratching started again, this time closer to the window, right below it. My chest pounded so hard I could hear it in my head. I yanked the curtain closed, clenched the poker, and prayed it would stop. After about 10 seconds, it went silent. I stood there holding my breath for a full minute, straining my ears. I couldn't handle the waiting, so I pounded on the wall with my fist and yelled, "Who's out there?" I heard my own voice shake. There was no answer. That night was the worst one. Around midnight I tried to sleep, but kept my ears open for any sound. The wind had died down, so every little creak in the cabin felt magnified. My back was damp with sweat again, and my head started to ache. A few times I thought I heard chanting outside, like that low whispering from before. My chest felt tight, and I tried to regulate my breathing by counting each inhale. I told myself I'd pack up in the morning and leave. I no longer cared about finding clarity or peace. I just wanted out. Suddenly, around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps on the porch. I know they were footsteps because the boards groaned in a steady rhythm. I could even sense the slight shift in weight on each step. My hands gripped the blankets, and my mouth went dry. I waited in absolute silence. The steps stopped near the front door. I expected a knock or another scratch, but there was just this heavy pause. My heart pounded so hard my ribs hurt. Then I heard a low voice, humming or chanting in a language I couldn't understand. My scalp felt like it was crawling. My hands were shaking under the blanket. I don't remember how long it lasted, maybe half a minute. Then the steps moved away, fading until the porch boards stopped creaking. I couldn't sleep after that. I sat up on the bed, my back against the headboard, my eyes on the bedroom door. Every now and then I heard a distant whisper or a faint scrape. My arms felt stiff, and my neck was sore from tension. I just kept staring at the bedroom doorway, wishing for dawn. The next morning I packed everything as fast as I could. I tossed my clothes into my bag without folding them. I stuffed my cooler with whatever was left. I shoved the blanket and some miscellaneous items into the back seat of my truck. I didn't even bother to clean up the cabin or check for anything I might have dropped. I glanced around one last time, making sure I didn't leave my wallet or phone. Then I locked the front door, got into my truck, and started the engine. My hands were trembling so much I had to clench the steering wheel to steady them. I drove away down that muddy trail, pressing the gas pedal harder than I should have. The branches scraped the sides of the truck, and my tires slid a bit on the wet path, but I kept going until I reached the main road. As I merged onto the highway, my body began to relax a little. My shoulders loosened, and my breathing became steadier. I looked at the forest in the rearview mirror and felt a rush of relief. My mind still buzzed with questions about what I saw and heard out there. I kept replaying the whispers, the footsteps, and the silhouettes that I caught in my flashlight. My heart pounded at the memories, but I felt better with each mile that separated me from that cabin. I don't know if I imagined half of it or not. All I know is that the tension, the fear, and that sense of being watched were real enough to leave me shaken. I went there looking for quiet. I left with my nerves shot and my peace shattered. I can't forget the whispers I heard, and I can't forget the way that clearing felt. I hope I never feel that way again. I still remember the first time I heard the footsteps in the hallway. It was my second night in that old apartment building. I had spent the entire day unpacking boxes and trying to get the place in order. I was tired, and all I wanted was a quiet evening. People had warned me about stories of strange occurrences here, but I dismissed all of that as nonsense. I figured it was just old pipes or wind drafts. When I heard those slow, deliberate steps outside my door, every hair on my arm stood up. I got up from the couch without thinking and put my ear to the door. The hallway was silent after the steps faded, but something felt off. I hadn't even lived there 48 hours and I was already on edge. I'm a man who relies on logic. I don't jump to paranormal conclusions. I try to explain things with facts. That first night, I tried to write off the footsteps as a neighbor walking by. Yet I realized there was only one other occupied unit on my floor, and my neighbor wasn't home. I knew he wasn't home because the day before, He told me he was heading out of town for a week. That detail made me pause, but I pushed it out of my head. I decided to go to bed and ignore it. The building had this old style, complete with creaky floors and vintage wallpaper in the hallways. My apartment itself was spacious, with tall ceilings and big windows. The paint was peeling in some spots, and there were strange stains on the walls that looked like they'd been there for decades. I tried not to focus on that. I just wanted a decent place to live. The rent was cheap. That was enough for me. On the third night, I started to hear more odd sounds. It began around midnight. I was in the living room, flipping through channels, when I heard a loud thud from somewhere above me. There shouldn't have been anyone above me because as far as I knew, that unit was empty. I muted the TV and listened. Another thud. Then something that sounded like scraping, like someone dragging furniture across the floor. My chest tightened. I tried to tell myself that maybe a maintenance worker was moving equipment around. But it was almost midnight. I doubted anyone was working at that hour. I got up and walked to the ceiling fixture in my living room just to pinpoint where the noise was coming from. The scraping got louder for a few seconds. Then it stopped. I felt a chill run through me. I found myself standing there staring at the ceiling, waiting for another sound. But after that final scrape, everything went quiet. My pulse was racing and my palms were sweaty. There's a certain feeling you get when something's wrong, like a gut-level alarm. I had it right then, but I didn't do anything about it. I just sat back down on the couch and waited for sleep to come. Over the next few days, I spoke to a couple of people in the building. The lady on the second floor mentioned that folks had been talking about sightings of a strange figure in the corridors. She shrugged it off, saying the stories had been around for decades. Another neighbor told me he'd heard weird scratching noises at night. He joked that we had an infestation of giant rats. The way he said it sounded forced, like he was trying to hide his discomfort. Nobody wanted to outright say ghost or monster, but that's what everyone was hinting at. I just nodded and pretended it didn't bother me. But late at night, my own fear started to wear down my rational side. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the next sound. Sometimes I could feel the floor vibrate, like something heavy was pacing in the hallway. I would hold my breath, listening for movement. On one occasion, I decided I'd had enough. I took a baseball bat I keep for self-defense and went out into the hallway. The old lights flickered, casting strange shadows on the chipped walls. My footsteps echoed on the worn-out carpet. The corridor felt narrow, and the air was stale, like nobody had opened a window there in years. I walked from one end to the other, checking every corner. Nothing. All the apartment doors were locked. Not a single sound broke the silence. I turned to go back, and that's when I heard a soft click behind me. I spun around with the bat raised. There was nothing there. My heart pounded so hard I felt it in my temples. I walked backward until I reached my door, then slipped inside and locked it. A few nights later, I started to see something more unsettling. I was in my bedroom getting ready to sleep when I noticed a movement outside my window. I live on the third floor, so there shouldn't have been anything outside that window. But I definitely saw a quick flash of movement across the glass. It looked like a shape with limbs that seemed too thin. My throat got tight and I felt this spike of adrenaline. I rushed to the window, trying to see if something was there. I pressed my face against the glass and looked down at the empty street. Nobody was there. No ledge or fire escape that a person could use. Just darkness and a few distant streetlights. I tried to laugh it off as a trick of the eyes, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I shut the curtains and sat on my bed, listening. Nothing happened for the next hour. I started drifting off, but a sudden slam jolted me awake. It felt like someone had hit my front door with a fist. I got up, heart pounding, and grabbed my bat. I walked toward the living room slowly. My bare feet were silent on the hardwood floor. I strained to hear any movement from the hallway. I flipped on the living room light and blinked against the sudden brightness. I stood there for a good minute, gripping the bat, waiting to hear something else. I checked the peephole. The corridor was empty. I locked the deadbolt and went back to my bedroom, leaving a few lights on. That night, I barely slept. These patterns continued for about a week. Footsteps, scraping, occasionally that shape outside my window. It was always a glimpse, never a full view. But each time I saw it, I felt this overpowering sense of dread, like I was looking at something that wasn't supposed to exist. My imagination went wild, even though I tried to ground myself in logic. One night, around 2 a.m., I decided I'd record everything on my phone. I set it up in the hallway, aiming it toward both ends of the corridor. Then I went back inside, left the door open a crack, and sat in my living room. I waited, listening for anything that might set off a reaction. After about half an hour, I heard faint footsteps again. They sounded wet somehow, like bare feet on the carpet. I froze and glanced at my phone's live feed. The corridor looked empty, except for the flickering light near the elevator. Then I saw a slight distortion on the screen, like the camera was losing focus. A dark shape slid into frame for just a second. It was tall and thin, and it moved with a weird stiffness. I couldn't make out its face or details. I only saw the outline before it vanished behind a corner. My body tensed up. I felt a burning sensation in my chest, like my lungs forgot how to breathe. I jumped up, phone in hand, and ran to the hallway. By the time I got there, it was gone. I checked the camera feed. Nothing else showed up. That clip sent me into a spiral of fear and confusion. I watched it again and again, trying to see if it was a glitch or a shadow. But it had the shape of a person, except its proportions were off. The limbs looked elongated. The head seemed slightly angled, like it was cocked to one side. I wanted to believe there was some rational explanation. Maybe a trick of the camera lens. But my gut told me otherwise. I started thinking about the stories I'd heard. Skinwalker, shapeshifter, ghost. I didn't know what to call it. All I knew was it felt real, and it scared the hell out of me. I spoke to my neighbor across the hall a few days later when he came back from his trip. He laughed at first when I told him about the camera footage. Then he noticed how serious I was. He told me he'd seen something similar months ago. He said he once woke up in the middle of the night and saw a long shadow in his bedroom doorway. He thought it was an intruder. He jumped out of bed, flicked on the lights, and the doorway was empty. He checked his door and saw it was still locked from the inside. He left the lights on all night. He never told anyone because he felt embarrassed. I could see the fear in his eyes as he recalled it. After hearing his story, I realized this thing was not just in my imagination. It was something that lingered in the building's walls, showing up when people least expected it. I started taking extra precautions. I slept with every door in my apartment locked. I put small pieces of tape on the outside of my windows to see if they were ever opened or tampered with. Nothing changed. The footsteps came and went. The scraping sometimes returned, and once or twice I caught that shape on camera again. Each sighting sent my heart into overdrive. One evening I decided I'd try to confront it. I sat in my living room with the lights off except for a small lamp in the corner. I had my bat next to me and my phone camera ready. Around midnight, I heard slow steps in the hallway. I gripped the bat so hard my knuckles ached. I started breathing faster, feeling tension in my shoulders and neck. My skin felt cold. I quietly moved to the door and peeked through the peephole. Nothing. Still, the footsteps kept going. They were faint but methodical. I opened the door a crack and held up my phone, trying to record. The hallway light flickered again. I saw a long shadow stretch across the wall, but the figure casting it wasn't visible. Then the shadow slid out of view. I stepped into the hallway, bat in one hand, phone in the other. My legs felt shaky. My mouth was dry. The footsteps seemed to move away from me toward the elevator. I followed them. I could feel my heart thumping in my chest. I kept the phone's flashlight on, pointing it ahead. The elevator at the end of the corridor looked rusted, and the panel lights were dim. The footsteps stopped. I panned the flashlight around, searching for any sign of movement. Suddenly, I heard a soft scraping sound behind me. I spun around. The hallway was empty. My pulse pounded in my ears, and I felt a knot in my stomach. I backed up, keeping my eyes on both ends of the corridor. My flashlight flickered. Then I heard a whisper-like sound, but I couldn't catch any words. It felt like someone breathing close to my ear. I swung the bat in that direction, hitting nothing but air. My breath came in short gasps. I hurried back to my apartment and slammed the door. My hands were shaking. I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. I started to realize that every encounter with this thing left me with an overwhelming sense of being watched. It felt like it wanted to play some twisted game of hide and seek. It never showed itself completely. It only let me see glimpses or hear fragments of sound. I was losing patience. My nerves were on edge all the time. I dreaded evenings, because I knew once the sun went down, this thing might appear or make noises. I found myself sleeping during the day and staying awake all night, just to feel a bit safer. One weekend, I tried talking to the building's manager. He was an older man who'd been around for a long time. He shrugged when I brought up strange sightings. He admitted there had been reports from past tenants, but none had ever proven anything. He said the building was old and had its quirks. I could tell he didn't want to delve into it. He changed the subject to the upcoming inspection, telling me to keep the place tidy. I left his office feeling frustrated and a bit hopeless. It seemed like everyone who lived here either ignored the problem or got used to it. That night I heard the footsteps again. But this time, they were right outside my door, pacing back and forth. I stood in my living room, phone in hand, recording. I had the lights on, my bat on the couch ready to grab. My body felt stiff. My breathing was shallow. The steps continued for a solid minute. Then I heard them pause. Suddenly the doorknob rattled. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I aimed my phone at the door, feeling sweat dripping down my back. The rattling stopped. Then, silence. I approached the door slowly, pressing my ear against it. I heard a faint scraping sound, like claws or nails on wood. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I tried to steady my hand, but it was trembling. The scraping stopped after a few seconds. I flipped the lock to double-check it was secured. Then I stood there for what felt like 10 minutes, waiting for something else. Nothing happened. When I finally checked the recording, I could clearly hear the footsteps, the knob rattling, and the scraping. I couldn't see anything, though. My hallway camera only showed an empty corridor. That was the last straw for me. My rational mind was telling me that something real was happening, but I had no solid evidence of a person or animal. I felt trapped in a situation with no reasonable explanation. I didn't know if it was some paranormal entity or a trespasser with an uncanny ability to hide. Either way, I was tired of feeling exposed. Now every night is an exercise in caution. I lock the door. I keep a flashlight and my bat nearby. I try to capture any noise on my phone, hoping to gather enough proof to show someone and get real help. Sometimes I consider breaking my lease, but moving costs money, and I don't have a lot of that right now. My neighbor down the hall occasionally checks in on me. He says he also hears things. We joke about some unstoppable phantom messing with us, but underneath our humor, we're both uneasy. I haven't seen that tall, thin shape outside my window in about a week, but I still feel like it could appear any moment. When the lights flicker or the floor creaks, my muscles tense up. I can't relax in my own home. Every noise sets me on edge. The nights feel longer than they should, and the building itself seems darker. I don't know what's out there lurking in the hallways, but it keeps showing me that it's not going away. Each night the tension builds. Each night I wonder if this thing will finally come through my door. So far I've only encountered it outside my apartment, or at most through the window. I'm waiting for the day it decides to cross that barrier. For now, I do what I can. I sleep in short bursts, usually after the sun rises because it feels safer then. I keep my phone charged and close at hand. I place small bells on my door handle, hoping they'll jingle if something tries to turn the knob. I haven't caught it in the act yet, but I still hear those footsteps at night. I still hear scraping in the empty apartment above me. And sometimes when I walk through the hallway, I swear I sense a presence just around the corner, waiting. I've accepted that logic can't fully explain this yet. I'm left with a reality that scares me. There's something in this building that defies easy answers. I don't know what it is, but it knows me now. It knows where I sleep. It knows how to make me question my own senses. And every night it plays this game of cat and mouse in the dark corridors, reminding me that some things can't be reasoned away. And so I wait, armed with nothing but a bat, a phone, and a locked door, wondering when it will make its next move. I arrived at the old ranch on a humid afternoon with a clipboard in one hand and a bundle of building plans in the other. My shirt stuck to my back, and I could taste dust on my lips from the long drive down the gravel road. I had a clear idea in my head. Turn these rundown barns and sheds into a thriving cultural space. I saw rooms for workshops, open areas for performances, and gathering spots for artists. My focus was on practical details like structural stability, roofing, and electrical wiring. I had no interest in folklore or strange occurrences. But from the moment I set foot on that land, I sensed something off. I walked across the main yard and heard small rustling sounds coming from the largest barn. At first I guessed it was an animal. Then I noticed how my footsteps seemed to echo. It wasn't a simple echo, though. It sounded like something else was walking in sync with me on the other side of the barn wall. I felt a jolt in my chest. My pulse sped up, and I took a quick breath. I told myself it might just be the acoustics in an empty building. I went inside, stepping carefully on loose planks. The barn smelled like old hay and damp wood. I looked around, squinting in the dim light. Nothing. No sign of raccoons, birds, or anything else. I remember thinking that I had let my imagination run wild. I had expected a standard demolition and reconstruction project. I shrugged and got back to work. Over the next few days, I cleared out junk. I found piles of tools, rusted nails, random pieces of broken furniture, and old horse tack in a corner. My gloves were coated with dust. My eyes stung from the debris in the air. I loaded trash into a small trailer, drove it out, and dumped it in a designated area. During these chores, the land stayed quiet, except for occasional gusts of wind. Still, I caught myself pausing now and then, thinking I heard footsteps behind me or faint voices somewhere in the distance. I would turn around fast, scanning the yard. Nothing would be there. On the 6th day, I started patching some holes in the main barn's roof. I climbed a tall ladder, balancing a hammer, nails, and spare wood. The sun was high, and sweat dripped down my forehead. While I was hammering in a new board, I heard a voice. It was distant and soft, like a person murmuring. I froze, heart pounding. The hammer slipped from my grip, and I nearly lost my balance. I forced myself to hold on to the ladder and turned my head to scan the property. No one else was around. My truck was parked by the fence, and I saw only the empty field stretching out. I felt my throat tighten. I wondered if I was dehydrated or if the heat was messing with me. I swallowed hard, collected my nerve, and finished the repair job. That evening, I decided to walk around the property with a flashlight. I wanted to check out the smaller outbuildings and see what I was dealing with. I had a sense of being watched. My steps felt heavy on the gravel path. The night air was still, but I heard a low rustling in the weeds. My flashlight beam caught scattered junk on the ground. Broken glass, rusty hinges, old rope. I kicked aside a loose plank, and something moved behind me. I spun around, heart pounding, light shaking in my hand. At first I saw nothing but the empty yard. Then a shape flickered near one of the sheds. It was tall, hunched, and looked like it had some sort of horns or antlers. It moved fast, disappearing behind the shed wall. I stopped breathing for a second. My palms felt clammy. I took a few steps closer, shining the flashlight on the spot. I called out, "Hey, who's there?" My voice echoed back. I heard my own breath, ragged and uneven. I forced myself to walk to that side of the shed. I found an empty space with piles of old bricks and a stack of rotted lumber. No footprints, no signs of anyone hiding. I listened for a moment. The air was quiet. I felt a rush of relief mixed with unease. I tried telling myself it was a trick of the light. maybe a shadow cast by my flashlight. But something about the shape made me uneasy. It looked real enough, and it moved with purpose. The next morning I got up early, feeling tense from the night before. My back was sore from sleeping on a stiff cot in the property's small farmhouse. I drank a cup of coffee, then stepped outside to check on the barns. The ground was still damp from morning dew. My boots left clear prints in the soil. I moved around the barn to see if I could spot anything unusual in the daylight. I found a faint indentation in the dirt near the shed, but it was too smeared to identify. Could have been a deer or a stray dog. I crouched down, running my hand over the ground. The soil was cool and it crumbled under my fingertips. I felt like someone was standing behind me, but when I looked around, I was alone. Despite my nerves, I had work to do. I spent the afternoon measuring interior walls in the second barn. I planned to transform it into a gallery space. While I measured the length of one wall, I heard a scrape on the opposite side. It sounded like claws or something sharp dragging against wood. My heart thudded in my chest. I wiped sweat from my upper lip and forced myself to investigate. I walked slowly, listening for any movement. The barn floor creaked under me. The light from a single dirty window made everything look dull and gray. In one corner I saw fresh scratch marks on the wall. They were about chest height, crossing in diagonal lines. My breath caught. I pressed my fingertips against the grooves. They were deep. The wood splintered. I felt a tingling in my scalp. There was no clear explanation. It looked deliberate. I went out to my truck and grabbed my phone, thinking about calling someone to help inspect the property. But I hesitated. I felt a stubborn need to handle this on my own. I was used to construction issues, broken pipes, and faulty wiring. I wasn't used to weird shapes lurking around and scratch marks on walls. Still, I didn't want to sound paranoid to anyone else, so I put the phone away and decided to set up a few motion sensor cameras. I drove into town, picked up some cameras and batteries, and returned before sunset. I installed them around the barns and in a few spots near the sheds. I tested them, making sure they picked up motion and recorded in low light. After that, I locked the barns for the night and tried to relax in the farmhouse. I couldn't sleep well. I kept hearing small thuds outside, followed by silence. Around midnight, I saw a light flicker under the door. It might have been the motion sensors going off. My heart pounded. I considered grabbing a small bat or some kind of tool for protection, but I stayed put. I forced myself to keep calm. After a long hour of lying awake, I finally drifted off. In the morning, I checked the cameras right away. The data showed a few triggers, mostly around midnight. But all I saw were quick blurs. One camera captured a shadow crossing the barn door, but it was too dark to make out any details. It looked large and moved past the lens in under a second. I felt a burst of fear in my stomach. I had proof that something was there, but I had no idea what it was. As the days went on, I continued the renovations. I installed new boards, removed rusted sheet metal, and even fixed up the farmhouse's porch. During the daytime, I kept hearing faint echoes like quiet voices. Sometimes they sounded like they were right behind me. Other times they seemed to come from the rafters. I climbed up to inspect the rafters and found old bird nests and cobwebs, but nothing else. My hands would shake sometimes when I heard those sounds. My breath would catch in my throat, and I'd clench my fists. I told myself to focus on the job. I hammered nails, sawed planks, and tried to push the disturbing stuff out of my head. One afternoon, while I was hauling debris out of the farthest barn, I stepped outside and felt a sudden chill. It was a hot day, so the cold air on my skin startled me. The wind picked up and the barn door slammed shut behind me. I spun around and pulled on the door handle, but it felt like something on the other side was pressing back. My heart raced. I yanked harder and it gave way. Inside, the space was empty, just dusty beams and scattered junk. My hands were shaking as I stepped back. Then I heard a low growling sound from above. My head shot up, and I saw a shape crouched in the rafters, but it was dark, and I couldn't see details. My spine felt like it was on fire. I stumbled back and nearly tripped over a stack of boards. I aimed my flashlight upward, but the beam just lit up dust particles. When I looked again, the shape was gone. I ran outside, breathing fast. I stood there with my hands on my knees, trying to steady myself. My mind raced with questions. Was I losing it? Was some large animal nesting in the rafters? The barns didn't look sturdy enough to support a bear or anything that size. And those horns or antlers I had seen before still bothered me. I decided to walk the perimeter again, scanning the tree line. The grass rustled in the breeze. My boots crunched on gravel. I felt a dull ache in my lower back from tension. I didn't see any movement, though. Just the quiet fields and a few scattered trees. That night, I stayed awake with a flashlight in my lap. I sat in the living room of the farmhouse, windows open. I listened for anything unusual. Around 1 a.m, I heard a thump on the porch. My chest tightened. I swallowed and stood up, holding the flashlight. I moved to the window, heart pounding, and peered outside. The porch light was weak, but I saw a tall silhouette near the steps. It had a broad shape, and I thought I saw something protruding from its head. My scalp prickled. I grabbed the doorknob, but I couldn't force myself to open it right away. I just stared through the window, waiting for my eyes to adjust. After a few seconds, the shape moved off the porch and disappeared into the yard. I couldn't see where it went. I forced myself to go out with the flashlight. I needed to see if it left tracks. My heart hammered in my chest and my stomach felt tight. I shined the light across the porch and down the steps. The wood creaked under my weight. I found faint impressions in the dirt that might have been hoof prints. They were oddly spaced, like whatever made them walked upright. I squatted down, shining the beam across the prints. My hands trembled. The night was silent around me, except for my quick breaths. I tried to follow the tracks, but they faded after a few yards. I felt a hollow sensation in my chest. I stayed out there a few more minutes, scanning the darkness, but I saw nothing else. The next day, I called a friend who worked in general contracting. I asked if he could bring a couple of workers out to help me. I said I wanted to speed up the renovation. I didn't mention anything about silhouettes or strange tracks. I just said I was behind schedule. They showed up the following morning in a big truck, carrying extra tools and lumber. With more people around, I thought whatever was lurking might stay away. We spent the whole day tearing out old beams, cleaning debris, and installing fresh supports. I kept an ear out for weird noises, but everything stayed quiet. I thought maybe the presence of more people made a difference. At one point, while I was hauling a bag of trash to the dumpster, I saw a flicker of movement by the tree line. I paused, leaning the bag against my leg. The shape stepped behind a trunk and vanished. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to ignore it and get back to the barn. The other workers didn't mention anything unusual. I decided not to bring it up. By evening, they left, taking their truck back to town. I felt that familiar tension in my stomach as I realized I was alone again. That night, I checked the cameras one more time. I sat at a small table in the farmhouse and watched the footage on my laptop. I saw nothing unusual from earlier in the day, but at around sunset, one camera caught a shape moving through the tall grass near the main barn. It looked bulky, and it had a strange outline around the head. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. I clicked through the frame slowly. The shape passed through the frame in about 3 seconds. I couldn't identify it. My mouth went dry, and my heart thudded. I decided to stay one more week to finish the main structural repairs. After that, I would hire a permanent crew to take over. Each day, I worked fast, focusing on the tasks at hand. I replaced siding on the barns, reinforced the floors, and prepped the walls for insulation. I tried to keep my mind busy. At night, I would hear a distant clatter or faint scratching sounds, but I avoided investigating them alone. I felt a constant tension in my shoulders. My sleep was light and interrupted. On my last day, I wrapped up the final bits of construction work I planned to do myself. I walked through each barn, checking the new boards and making notes for the next crew. As I stood in the biggest barn, looking at the new beams, I heard a low grunt behind me. I spun around, heart thumping. Near the door, a tall silhouette stood, just long enough for me to see its outline. It had a broad chest and what looked like horns. Then it darted out of sight. My hands began to shake and my breath caught in my throat. I felt a shiver through my entire body. I backed away, bumped into a post, and nearly dropped my clipboard. I hurried outside into the daylight, scanning the area. Nothing moved except the grass and the breeze. I locked up everything, hopped in my truck, and sat there for a minute, breathing hard. My chest felt tight, and I noticed sweat on my neck. After a moment, I started the engine and drove off. On the road, I looked back at the barns in the rearview mirror. They looked quiet and empty under the bright sun. But I knew there was something there, something I couldn't explain with any practical fix. I didn't feel relief until I was miles away. I never found out exactly what roamed that property or why I kept hearing those voices. I left the recordings with the new crew, telling them to keep an eye on the place. I haven't heard any final reports from them yet. But I still remember the feeling of being watched, the sound of footsteps echoing in those dusty corridors, and the shape of horns slipping out of view. If I ever go back, I'll bring more than a flashlight. Until then, I'll let that land keep its secrets. I arrived at the cabin late in the afternoon. The sun was still up, but it was dipping behind a row of tall pines near the edge of the property. I felt a slight unease in my chest the moment I climbed out of my truck. The wind was blowing against the trees, and the sound reminded me of someone whispering right behind my ear. I glanced around and saw nobody, just the thick trunks and the branches swaying. I took a deep breath, shook off the feeling, and started unpacking. I came here for peace, so I tried to focus on that. I carried my boxes into the small living area. The cabin was old, with worn wooden floors and a stone fireplace. The windows looked dusty. I placed my bags on the floor near the couch and walked around to check everything. The kitchen was simple, with a small table in the corner and a narrow window facing the backyard. I could see tall grass through the window and more pines in the distance. The place felt quiet, and I liked that. I spent the next few hours organizing, putting plates in the cabinets and stacking cans of food in the pantry. As the sun went down, the interior of the cabin got darker. I turned on a single lamp in the living room and then walked outside to check the surroundings. The sky had turned a deep blue, and the tree line was a black outline against it. A gust of wind rustled the branches. I heard a faint sound, almost like a low voice carried on the air. It gave me goosebumps on my arms. My heart thumped in my chest, but I saw nothing unusual. I forced myself to relax, stood there for a minute, and stared at the tree line. Then I walked back inside and locked the door. I slept fitfully that night. The bed was firm, and I kept hearing strange creaks in the floor. Around 2 a.m, I opened my eyes because I thought I heard someone outside. I listened, breathing slowly, but all I caught was the soft sigh of the wind. My mouth felt dry, so I got up and went into the kitchen. The moonlight coming through the windows lit a small patch on the floor. I stood there in the dark for a bit, sipping water. My skin was tingling, like I was waiting for something to jump out of a corner. I told myself it was just nerves from moving to a new place. I went back to bed and finally fell asleep again. In the morning, the air felt fresh, and I was relieved to see sunlight spilling through the windows. I made breakfast, then decided to explore the property. The cabin sat in a clearing with thick forest on all sides. I walked toward the tallest pines, feeling the crunch of twigs and pine needles under my boots. I noticed small animal tracks in the dirt. They looked like deer tracks, but the spacing seemed odd. I followed them for a while, then they disappeared into a patch of grass. As I made my way deeper into the woods, I saw a few old tree stumps scattered around. They looked like they were cut ages ago. I also noticed some strange markings carved into one of the stumps. They looked like random lines, almost like a pattern, but I couldn't make sense of it. I touched the grooves. They felt smooth, as if someone had run a knife or chisel over them many times. That feeling of unease crept back. I looked around and realized how quiet it was. No birdsong, no rustling of small animals, just the wind passing through the branches. I headed back to the cabin after about an hour. My head was pounding a little from the tension. I realized I was breathing fast, like I'd been running even though I was just walking. I told myself I would relax, maybe read a book and settle in. I sat on the couch, opened a paperback, and tried to focus on the words. But the quiet felt unnerving, like the world was holding its breath. I thought about turning on some music, but I wanted to get used to the silence here. After all, that's why I came. Later that afternoon, I decided to step outside again. The wind had picked up, and it made a low whooshing sound through the pines. As I stood on the porch, I had that sensation of being watched. My shoulders tensed, and the back of my neck felt hot. I scanned the tree line, searching for any sign of movement. For a second, I thought I saw a figure between the trees. It looked like someone standing still, half hidden by shadow. I stared hard, my pulse kicking up, but then a branch swayed, and it seemed to dissolve into the darkness. I walked down the steps and moved closer, hoping to see if there was actually anyone there. Each step made my heart pound. When I reached the spot where I thought I'd seen the figure, I found nothing but dead leaves and thick roots. I circled around the area, looking for footprints or snapped branches. I saw only the uneven ground and a few scattered pine cones. I felt foolish, but I couldn't shake the feeling of that shape, like it was still lurking just out of sight. Over the next few days, I tried to stick to a routine. I woke up early, made coffee, and took a short walk around the property. I spent time cleaning the cabin, installing new locks, and making small repairs. But each day, something about the woods put me on edge. I kept hearing soft whispers in the wind. Sometimes they sounded like my name. Other times, they seemed like meaningless murmurs. I kept seeing flickers of movement between the trees, especially around dusk. Every time I went to check and found no one. I started to sleep worse. I lay in bed, eyes closed, and I felt my pulse in my ears. It throbbed with every little sound. I would jump at the creaking of the cabin's old boards or the sigh of the breeze under the door. My thoughts kept drifting to the idea that there was something in the woods, something that watched me. I tried telling myself it was my imagination, but I couldn't ignore how my hands trembled sometimes or how my stomach churned with unease. One afternoon, I ventured deeper into the forest, determined to understand what was out there. The air felt heavy, like it was pressing in on me. My steps seemed too loud on the ground. I noticed that same pattern of lines carved into a few more tree trunks. They formed a ring around my property, spaced out but obviously deliberate. Each set of lines looked worn, like they'd been there for decades. I reached out and ran my fingers over the carvings on one trunk. They felt cold and smooth, even in the warm sun. My gut twisted, and I felt a sense of pressure on my chest. I kept walking, checking each marked tree I passed. Soon I came to a clearing I'd never seen before. A large boulder sat in the middle, covered in moss. My legs felt shaky as I approached it. The top of the boulder had faint scratches on it, forming a similar pattern to the trees. I crouched down, feeling my heart hammer in my rib cage. The wind around me went still, as if the forest was waiting. I reached out and touched the marks. My fingertips tingled. A sudden rustling sound made me spin around. My pulse surged, and I clenched my fists, expecting to see someone standing there. But I saw only branches swaying. My breathing was ragged. I decided I'd had enough and rushed back toward the cabin. That night, I didn't want to close my eyes. I paced the living room, listening to every little noise outside. Around midnight, I turned off the lights and looked through the window. The sky was cloudy and the moonlight was weak. The silhouette of the forest seemed darker than usual. I felt certain something was standing among the trees, watching. The hair on my arm stood up and my stomach tensed. My heart thumped so hard I could feel it in my neck. I thought about leaving. I even grabbed my keys from the coffee table. But I didn't want to run from something that might only exist in my head. So I forced myself to stay. I sat on the couch, keys in my hand, and told myself I would confront whatever this was. I didn't even know what that meant, but it felt like the only choice. My mind raced with questions. Who made these carvings? Why did I keep seeing shapes among the trees? I couldn't answer anything. I stayed awake until dawn, eyes red from lack of sleep. Over the following days, the odd events continued. Once, while I was chopping wood, I heard a clear voice behind me. It was quiet, like a whisper, but it sounded close. I whipped around with the axe still in my hands, expecting to see a person standing a few feet away. Nobody was there. The only sound was the wind. My palms were slick with sweat, and I could barely keep hold of the axe. I let it fall to the ground, and I leaned against the stack of logs, breathing fast. My arms were shaking. That evening, I tried to call a friend in town to see if anyone knew about the strange carvings or the local history. The phone connection kept dropping. I felt like the world was conspiring to keep me in the dark. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the phone, my leg bouncing. I didn't have a strong signal out here, and the line crackled whenever I tried to speak. I eventually gave up. A few days later, I discovered something else. I walked around the back of the cabin and found a narrow path I hadn't noticed before. The grass was flattened, forming a trail that led past a cluster of thorny bushes. I followed it, pushing branches aside. After about 10 yards, I came across an old shed. It was falling apart, with broken planks of wood and rusted nails. The door hung crooked on its hinge. I stepped inside and coughed at the burst of stale air. The interior was dark, but light came through some gaps in the walls. I spotted old tools, a couple of wooden boxes, and a lantern covered in cobwebs. I moved deeper into the shed, kicking aside debris. The place smelled like damp earth and rotting leaves. I saw more of those carved lines on a broken board. They matched the ones I'd seen on the trees. I picked up the board, feeling a chill in my gut. It was about a foot long, and the pattern looked precise. I heard a muffled thud behind me and turned around, heart racing. Something fell from one of the rafters, a small piece of wood with a similar marking. It hit the dirt floor and split in half. My throat went dry. It felt like these shapes were everywhere, like I couldn't escape them. I left the shed in a hurry, stumbling over a piece of wood near the door. My knee banged against the threshold and I hissed in pain. I limped back to the cabin, sweat running down my face. My thoughts were jumbled, and I kept replaying that moment in my head. I locked the cabin door behind me and leaned against it, trying to steady my breathing. My knee throbbed. I put some ice on it from the small freezer, then sat on the couch, staring at the wall. Every noise outside made me flinch. That night was the worst so far. The wind howled around the cabin, rattling the windows. The trees outside creaked, and the sound reminded me of low voices. I kept getting up to look through the curtains. Each time I'd feel that same jolt in my chest, like I expected to see something peering back at me. I was drenched in sweat, even though the air was cool. My hands shook and I felt a buzzing in my ears. I wanted answers, but I didn't know where to look. Eventually, I grabbed a flashlight and went outside. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst. I walked around the cabin's perimeter, shining the beam through the darkness. The trees swayed in the distance, and the wind carried those faint murmurs. My mind kept imagining shapes in the shadows. I forced myself to keep going. When I circled back to the front, I stopped and listened. My pulse pounded in my temples. The whispers sounded louder than ever. I heard my own breathing, rapid and uneven. The flashlight shook in my grip. Then for a split second, I spotted a dark outline between two pines. It wasn't tall, maybe around my height, but it felt wrong. My stomach flipped. I froze. The silhouette didn't move. I tried to step closer, but my knees felt weak. The wind shifted, and a branch swayed, blocking my view. When I aimed the flashlight again, the shape was gone. I stood there, every muscle tense, my breathing labored. My mind raced with questions about what I'd just seen. I felt cornered by the darkness around me, like the trees were closing in. I backed up to the porch and hurried inside, locking the door. My chest was tight. I shut off all the lights and stood in the living room, swallowing hard. A prickly sensation ran from the top of my head down my back. I couldn't calm down for hours. Each time I closed my eyes, I'd see that silhouette. My body felt exhausted, but my mind wouldn't let me rest. In the days that followed, I tried to keep myself occupied by fixing things around the cabin. I sealed up cracks, reinforced the windows, and repainted some of the worn walls. But at night, the presence in the woods grew more insistent. The faint whispers sounded closer. I sometimes heard soft footsteps on the porch, or maybe it was just the house settling. I could never be sure. When I opened the door to check, nothing was there. The tension made my neck and shoulders ache. My back felt stiff and I kept getting headaches. I thought about packing up and leaving for good. Yet I also felt a strange pull to stay. The forest around me had an old story and it kept calling to me. The carvings, the silhouettes, the hushed voices. They all hinted at something ancient that wanted me to pay attention. But I didn't know how to respond. I had no instructions, no way to fight it, and no real proof. All I had were my own rattled nerves and these odd marks in the woods. Last night I sat on the porch with the flashlight off, trying to observe in silence. The forest was a dark wall. The moon was hidden by clouds, and I couldn't see more than a few yards ahead. My body was tense, and my heartbeat felt like a drum in my chest. I waited for movement, straining my ears for any sound. The wind came in bursts, carrying those faint whispers. Sometimes I thought I heard my name. Sometimes it was just a sigh that made me shiver. My palms were sweaty, and my throat felt tight. I stayed there until the first light of dawn touched the sky. My back ached from sitting still so long. I stood up slowly, my bones cracking, and went inside. I grabbed a bottle of water and gulped it down, leaning against the kitchen counter. My vision was a little blurry from lack of sleep. My mind felt stretched thin. Yet I was still here, still facing the same terrifying silence. Part of me wanted to collapse from exhaustion, but another part stayed on high alert, expecting something to burst through the windows at any moment. Now it's morning again. I'm writing this down to organize my thoughts. My hands are shaking as I do it. The cabin feels claustrophobic, but the woods outside feel alive with something I can't explain. I'm not sure how long I can hold out here. My heart races every time I think about stepping outside, but staying indoors feels suffocating. There is no peace in this place. The wind whispers it every night and the shadows confirm it. There's an old presence here, and it wants me to listen, whether I like it or not. I'm not sure what I'll do next. I only know that I'm trapped between my fear of leaving and my fear of staying. And every time the wind picks up, I hear those voices telling me that I've stumbled into a story that won't let go. I moved into this apartment 2 weeks ago. I chose it because it was close to work and had a decent price. The building is old, but the paint job looked fine, and the lobby seemed clean enough. On my first day, I carried in boxes, set up my couch, and plugged in my TV. By the evening, I felt a normal level of exhaustion. There was nothing unusual. I went to bed around midnight. It was quiet. The hallway outside my door was dim, and I only heard the faint buzz from the exit sign. I locked the door, turned off all the lights, and fell asleep without any problems. The next morning, I woke up around 6. I heard footsteps in the hallway. They weren't loud, but they were distinct enough to register as a person walking. I wondered if someone was heading out early for a morning shift. I got out of bed, put on my robe, and opened the door. The hallway was empty. I didn't see anyone. I shrugged it off. It was my second day here. I figured the sound must have come from the staircase or an apartment next door. That evening, I returned from work around 7. I grabbed my mail from the lobby, walked up the stairs, and reached my floor. My door is the second on the right. I noticed a light flickering overhead, but I didn't pay much attention. Inside my place, the living room was still full of unpacked boxes, so I cleared a spot on the floor to sit and eat some takeout. I turned on the TV for background noise and tried to relax. At about 10, I heard footsteps again. They seemed to move back and forth right outside my door, but they never stopped at any of the other units. I muted the TV to confirm. The steps continued for a few more seconds, then stopped. I got up and opened the door. The corridor lights were on. Nobody was there. No movement, no closing doors, no sounds from the elevator. I felt a slight chill, but I told myself it might be a neighbor wearing soft shoes who ducked into the stairwell. I locked the door and sat back down, trying to focus on a show. The next couple of days I heard the footsteps again, sometimes during the morning, sometimes late at night. It wasn't consistent. Each time they sounded slow, like someone deliberately pacing. I never saw anybody. I tried to ignore it. I kept telling myself I was too stressed from work or that the sounds were traveling oddly through old vents. On Friday, I decided to do a small test. When I got home, I placed a piece of tape on the outside of my door at ankle height. I wanted to see if someone brushed against it. I felt a bit ridiculous, but I was curious. Around 9, the footsteps started up again. I sat in the dark, leaning against the door, waiting for them to pass. After a minute, they stopped. I carefully opened the door and checked the tape. It was undisturbed, still stuck in place. The hallway light flickered, but there was no one there. I felt my stomach tighten. I went back inside and tried to distract myself with music. It didn't help much. I spent the night unsettled, pacing around my living room. Over the weekend, I unpacked more boxes. I tried to arrange my bedroom so I'd feel more settled. I put my bed against the far wall, away from the door. I also set up a small desk near the window. I was trying to establish a comfortable routine. In the middle of the day, I heard something that wasn't just footsteps. I was in the bathroom organizing the cabinet when I heard a soft thump in the hallway. It sounded like someone tapping on the wall. I froze. My heart beat faster. My hands felt sweaty. I opened the bathroom door and walked to the living room. The sound stopped. I felt a little silly standing there with a toilet brush in one hand, but I also felt a slight tremor in my chest. I tried to calm down by taking slow breaths. I decided to walk out into the hallway again, but once more, everything was empty. The building was quiet except for a faint hum from the lights. I went back inside and locked the door. I had trouble focusing on anything after that. That night, I decided to stay up late and listen carefully. I turned off all the lights except for a small lamp in the living room. I sat on my couch with a notebook, ready to write down the times I heard anything strange. Around midnight, I heard a faint scraping sound on the floor above me. It could have been furniture moving. Then I heard the familiar footsteps. They seemed right outside my door. I leaned against the door again to pinpoint their direction. It sounded like they were moving from left to right across my door. My pulse was pounding in my ears. I wrote down footsteps 12:03 a.m. Then I heard a short creak, like a door hinge. My mouth went dry. I opened my door fast, hoping to catch whoever was there. Nobody was in the hallway. The flickering light was the only movement. I looked at the other doors in the corridor. They were all closed. I swallowed hard and walked down toward the staircase. I peered down the steps. It was empty. I felt my arms trembling. I walked back to my door and locked it again, feeling more on edge than ever. The next day, I approached one of my neighbors while getting the mail. She was a middle-aged woman with a couple of grocery bags in her hands. I introduced myself and asked if she'd heard anything strange at night. She tilted her head and said she didn't hear much except for the usual creaks. I mentioned footsteps in the hallway, but she said she never noticed. She shrugged and said the building was old. Then she wished me a good day and walked off. I felt isolated. I wanted to chalk it up to building noises, but the consistency of these footsteps was too exact. They had a pattern and a pace that sounded human. I couldn't find a logical explanation. On Monday after work, I decided to set up my phone to record video in the hallway. I waited until the corridor was empty, then placed the phone on a small table near my door. I left it running while I sat inside. I turned on my TV to pass the time, though I kept the volume low. I wanted my phone's microphone to pick up any sounds. After an hour, I retrieved my phone. The battery was at half, and it had been recording the whole time. I played back the video. At around 40 minutes in, I heard faint footsteps. I leaned in, turning the volume up. The corridor looked empty on screen, but the audio picked up that distinct tread. Then, right when the footsteps should have been in view, I saw nothing. No shape, no figure, no movement. It was just an empty hallway. My throat tightened. I kept watching. The footsteps stopped abruptly, and the hallway stayed still. I felt this cold pressure in my chest. I saved the video and decided not to watch it again right away. I didn't want to dwell on it more than I had to. That night, I tried to sleep early. I shut off my phone. I closed the curtains. I put in some earplugs. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up with my heart racing. I heard something new in the living room. It sounded like a chair scraping on the floor. The earplugs had fallen out, so I heard it clearly. My mouth went dry. I got up, turned on the bedroom lamp, and stood there. I listened for more noise. At first, there was silence. Then I heard a faint rustling, like someone shifting their weight on my couch. My hands were shaking. I grabbed the heaviest object I could find, a cheap metal floor lamp. I walked slowly into the living room. The couch was empty. The chair was in the same spot as before. Nothing looked moved. The television was off. The door was still locked. My entire body was tense. I heard my own breathing, quick and shallow. I turned on every light in the apartment. I double-checked every closet. I even opened the kitchen cabinets. Nothing. I considered calling the police, but I didn't have a clear explanation for them. Nobody had broken in as far as I could tell. No sign of forced entry. I ended up staying awake until sunrise with the lights on. The next day at work, I felt exhausted. My productivity dropped and I couldn't concentrate. I kept replaying the events in my head, searching for a logical explanation. I came home that evening determined to figure something out. I walked around the apartment, carefully tapping on walls, checking for hidden vents or any space that could cause weird acoustics. Everything sounded solid. I turned off the air conditioning to see if that made a difference. The apartment was silent until about 9. Then I heard faint movement again, but this time it wasn't in the corridor. It was inside my bedroom. I rushed in. The door was closed, but I'd left the light off. I flung the door open, flicked on the light, and saw nothing unusual. The bed was made, the desk was undisturbed, and the closet door was still shut. I felt my heart pounding against my ribs. I checked under the bed. Nothing there. I opened the closet. Just my clothes and a couple of boxes. No sign of any disturbance. I shut the closet and moved backward into the hallway. Suddenly, I felt a cool draft pass by my legs. There was no open window. I stood still, scanning the air, but I saw nothing. My arms broke out in goosebumps. The following morning, I spoke with the building manager. His office is on the first floor. I told him I was hearing strange noises. I asked if there was any known issue with the plumbing or the ventilation that might cause it. He shook his head and said everything was fine. He mentioned the previous tenant never complained. He looked at me like I was paranoid. I asked if the corridor security camera ever picked up anything unusual. He said the cameras in our hallway sometimes glitch, but there was nothing recorded about unauthorized visitors. I walked away feeling uneasy. Nobody else seemed to share my experiences or concerns. I started doubting my own mind, but the audio and the personal encounters felt too real to dismiss. That night, the footsteps returned around midnight. They paced back and forth for at least 2 minutes. I knew because I checked the time on my phone when they started. My mouth felt dry, and I could hear blood pounding in my ears. I stayed in bed, too nervous to open the door again. I hoped they would go away if I ignored them. Eventually they stopped, but then the faint tapping started. It sounded like knuckles on drywall tapping in a slow rhythm. My legs felt stiff. I sat up in bed and listened. The tapping shifted to the living room wall. I clenched my fists, breathing quickly. Then it moved to the wall right behind my headboard. I jumped out of bed, grabbed my phone, and stood in the middle of the room. The tapping went silent. My hands shook so badly that I nearly dropped the phone. I decided I couldn't stay there alone in the dark. I grabbed some clothes, threw them into a backpack, and left the apartment. My plan was to stay at a cheap motel for the night. I ended up coming back the next morning because I didn't want to abandon my place. I felt irritated and a bit embarrassed that I ran off. It's my home and I pay rent for it. I refused to let these events drive me away without answers. I decided to take a direct approach. I set up a small camera in the living room aimed at the bedroom door. Then I left all the lights on in the apartment and waited. I wanted to catch something on video inside the apartment. For hours, it was quiet. Around 1 a.m., my camera's motion alert pinged my phone. I was sitting on the couch, half dozing. I snapped awake and watched the live feed. The bedroom door was open, but I hadn't left it like that. My stomach clenched. I glanced at the door from where I was sitting. In reality, it still looked shut, but on the video feed, it was wide open. There was a slight distortion in the image, as if something was interfering with the camera. My breathing sped up. I felt pins and needles in my hands. Then, the door on the video slowly moved until it closed. In real life, the door never moved. I stared at it from the couch. It stayed shut the entire time. After a few seconds, the feed returned to normal, and the door showed as closed. I didn't know what to think. I walked over to the bedroom door, grabbed the handle, and tried opening it. It was unlocked, and nothing stopped it from swinging open. There was no explanation for the camera feed glitch. I rewound the footage to watch it again. The video clearly showed the door open for about 10 seconds, then shutting on its own. I felt my legs shaking as I stood there. My pulse throbbed in my temples. My chest felt tight. I realized I couldn't keep ignoring these events. They weren't going away. I considered moving out, but my finances were tight. I also felt a need to confront whatever was happening, even though it made no rational sense. I spent the rest of the night with all the lights on. I didn't fall asleep until early morning. I kept glancing at the camera feed on my phone, but nothing else happened. The next day, I saw another neighbor in the hallway. He was pulling a small suitcase behind him. I asked if he'd experienced anything unusual at night. He shook his head and said everything seemed normal to him. He gave me a strange look when I described the footsteps. He left for what he said was a business trip. I lingered in the hallway, staring at the flickering light above me. The building felt silent and empty. No one else stepped out of their apartments. I returned to my place and locked the door. I've been here for 2 weeks now. The footsteps come and go. Sometimes I hear tapping on the walls. Sometimes I see shadows shift across the hallway floor when there's no one standing there. I still try to rationalize it as a trick of the light or a glitch in old wiring. But each new incident chips away at my certainty. I feel my heart race whenever the hallway light flickers, wondering if I'll see something again. I check my camera recordings daily, but I've stopped sharing them with anyone else. People would think I'm losing my mind. I'm not sure what's real anymore, but I know what I hear and see. At night, I lock every door and window. I keep my phone charged and ready to record. I can't shake the feeling that something watches me from the corners of my own home. I still stay in this apartment because I don't have a clear way out. I also need solid evidence before I break the lease or move somewhere else. My plan is to set up more cameras and record every strange event. I know it's not normal. My body reacts each time. My pulse jumps, my hands sweat, and my eyes water from lack of sleep. I feel the weight of dread in my stomach, but I can't walk away without understanding what's happening. I'm just waiting for the next footsteps or the next sign that I'm not alone here. I'm alert, but I don't know what to expect. I only know that something is wrong, and it keeps pushing me to question everything I thought I understood. I stepped into the library with a rush of excitement. The building's outer walls looked worn, and the stone arch at the entrance had cracks along the edges. I'd read about this place in an old travel guide. People called it a hidden landmark. They said it held rare texts and documents you couldn't find anywhere else. I wanted to see everything, so I arrived early in the afternoon. I expected dust, old shelves, and a quiet space where I could explore. I never expected to feel true fear in a library, but that's exactly what happened. When I walked through the door, I noticed a chilly draft drifting along the hallway. The front desk was off to the left, but I didn't see anyone at first. I called out, "Hello?" My voice echoed in a hollow way. I heard a slight shuffle from somewhere behind the desk. Then an older man stood up. He had thick glasses and a wrinkled shirt. He looked at me like he was annoyed. I got the impression he didn't expect visitors often. He asked if he could help me find something, and I explained I just wanted to explore the archives. He shrugged and gave me a brief set of directions. 3rd floor, far corner, narrow corridor. I nodded and walked deeper into the building. The hallway had high ceilings. The walls had old lamps that flickered with a faint orange glow. They made the shadows on the floor stretch. I heard my own footsteps tapping along the tiles. The emptiness felt strange. The entire place smelled like old paper and faint mold. I made it to the grand staircase in the center of the building. The steps creaked when I climbed. I ran my hand along the railing. The smooth surface felt cold. On the 2nd floor, I passed rows of shelves full of thick books. Some titles were in languages I didn't recognize. A few tables and chairs stood in the middle of that large reading room, but no one was there. A quiet hush filled the air, broken only by the distant hum of overhead lights. That's when I heard the first soft whisper. It sounded like a faint breath behind me. I spun around, but I didn't see anything. My heart rate picked up a little, but I shook it off. I thought it was just the wind or maybe the old lighting. I continued up to the 3rd floor and followed the old man's directions. That corridor was long and dim. The overhead bulbs flickered as I passed beneath them. They weren't bright. They gave the hallway a sort of murky glow. Shelves lined both sides. I looked at the spines of the books. A lot of them had dates from the 1800s. Some had covers that were faded or peeling. The air felt stale. My nose twitched from the dust. I started walking slowly, scanning the titles. I felt a small twinge of unease. My palms felt sweaty, and I kept glancing over my shoulder. I heard another whisper, this time on my left. It was a single word. I couldn't understand it, but it sounded sharp. I froze and listened. A few seconds passed. Silence. I waited, expecting another sound. I didn't hear anything else, so I kept moving. My mind started racing. I thought maybe there was a vent or an open window that caused odd noises. I couldn't see any windows in that corridor, though. Everything felt closed off. I checked a few aisles between the shelves, but each one seemed empty. As I kept going, I reached a small reading nook. There was a desk with a green lamp, an old wooden chair, and a pile of books on local history. I decided to take a seat. I set my bag on the floor and pulled out my notebook. I jotted down the titles I wanted to check. I had some references I was hoping to find. The lamp buzzed softly. I could hear the faint crackle of the bulb. I felt uneasy, but I tried to stay focused. I heard my own breathing. It sounded loud in that stillness. Suddenly I caught a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. I lifted my head and looked at the end of the aisle. Something moved behind a shelf. It was quick, like a flash of a shadow. I stood up, walked toward that spot, and checked the rows. Nothing was there. My heart pounded. I felt a wave of heat rush through my body. I wiped sweat from my forehead. My throat felt tight. I tried to calm down, telling myself it was probably just a trick of the light. I returned to the desk and looked at the old books spread across it. Titles like Early Settlers' Accounts and Forgotten Practices covered the page edges. I opened one with a dark green cover. Inside, there were faded drawings and brief notes about local legends. I turned a few pages, scanning for something interesting. That's when I heard a shuffle behind me, like a footstep. My heart jumped. I spun around, and I saw a figure at the far end of the corridor. It stood there, still as a statue. The lighting was poor, but I made out a tall silhouette. I couldn't see any facial features. Its frame looked off. Its limbs seemed elongated. The head tilted to one side, as if observing me. I felt a surge of adrenaline. My chest felt tight and my arms tingled. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my composure. I managed to say, "Hello?" My voice sounded weak. The figure didn't answer. I took one step toward it, but the overhead light flickered. In that brief blink, the figure was gone. I felt an immediate chill in the pit of my stomach. My breathing turned shallow, my ears buzzed. I went to the spot where I'd seen it. That area was empty, but the air felt cold. I rubbed my arms, trying to warm myself. I realized I was trembling. I felt like I was being watched. I started thinking about the stories I'd heard, rumors of shapeshifters or entities that imitate humans. Some people called them skinwalkers, but I never paid attention to those tales. Now, though, I couldn't ignore how unsettled I felt. I decided to gather my thoughts. I returned to the reading desk, packed up my notebook, and tried to decide what to do. My instincts told me to leave, but my curiosity battled that urge. I wanted answers. I wanted to see if I was imagining things or if something was really there. I took a deep breath and made my way down another row of shelves. My footsteps echoed. I walked slowly, scanning each aisle. At times, I thought I heard small clicks on the floor behind me. Each time I turned, I saw nothing. I found a door at the end of the corridor. It had a brass knob. I tried it, and it opened with a low creak. The room beyond was some kind of storage area. Stacks of boxes lined the walls. There was one small window near the ceiling, but the glass looked dirty. The place smelled stale and damp. I stepped inside, hoping to find something that would explain those noises. I didn't see any signs of a person. I did notice scratch marks on the floor near a pile of crates. They weren't deep, but they looked deliberate. They were arranged in patterns, like a cluster of short grooves. I heard a scraping noise from outside the door. It sounded like something brushing against the wall. I turned off my flashlight for a moment and pressed my ear to the door, trying to listen. My breathing felt ragged. My pulse pounded against my temples. I couldn't hear a clear voice, only a faint shuffle. After a few seconds, I opened the door a crack. The corridor was dark. The overhead lights were still on, but they looked dimmer. The hallway seemed longer than before. I couldn't see the main staircase from where I was. I took a step into the corridor, looking both ways. Then that figure appeared again, halfway down the hall on my right side. It stood there with its head slightly lowered, arms at its sides. I froze, feeling sweat trickle down my back. My hands shook. The figure's shoulders rose and fell like it was breathing. I couldn't see its eyes. I felt a deep, prickling fear in my gut. My immediate thought was to step back into the storage room, but I didn't want to get cornered. I decided to walk left, toward the reading nook and hopefully toward the staircase. I moved slowly, never taking my eyes off that shape. It didn't advance. It just stood there. Then I heard a noise like a faint hiss, but I wasn't sure if it was my imagination or real. My heart thudded so hard that my ears felt like they were full of static. As I reached the bend in the corridor, the figure twitched. It bent forward in a sudden, jerky movement. I felt my chest tighten and I turned around and started running. I didn't sprint at full speed, but I moved faster than I intended. My footsteps slapped against the floor. My breath came in short bursts. I heard something behind me, like claws skittering across the tile. I rounded the corner and nearly tripped over my own foot. I caught myself on a nearby shelf. A few books tumbled to the floor. The noise echoed. I glanced over my shoulder but saw no one. The corridor was empty. My arms felt weak, and I steadied myself against the shelf. I heard a faint whisper from the direction I'd just come from. It sounded like it was calling me, but I couldn't make out any words. I told myself I needed to leave. This was beyond a simple curiosity. I didn't know what I was dealing with, and my instincts told me to get out. I headed toward the staircase, trying to stay calm. I avoided sudden movements, and I listened carefully. Each step made the wooden floor creak. When I reached the landing, I looked down and saw the main floor. I spotted the old man at the front desk. He was leaning over something, maybe a ledger or a stack of papers. I felt a wave of relief. I wanted to call out to him and ask if he'd seen anyone else in the building. I hurried down, trying not to trip. When I got close enough, I saw he was writing with a fountain pen. His eyes flicked up at me. He looked annoyed again, but I didn't care about that. I asked, "Is there someone else here?" I saw something on the third floor. He stared for a moment, his forehead creased. Then he gave a short shrug and said he hadn't seen anyone else come in. He claimed it was only the two of us. I felt frustrated. I wanted to show him the scratch marks or the corridor where the lights flickered. Instead, I just stared at him. My mind raced, but words didn't come out easily. He told me the library was big and sometimes the old pipes made strange noises. My hands still trembled, and I noticed I was covered in a thin layer of sweat. I stepped away from the desk and looked around the main floor, hoping to spot some sign of that figure. Everything seemed normal. A few lights buzzed overhead. Rows of wooden tables filled the reading area. Nothing looked out of place. I debated going back upstairs, but part of me felt sick at the idea. I couldn't stand the thought of being alone up there again. My eyes darted toward the front entrance. I could see the tall doors. I took a deep breath and tried to decide if I should leave. I resolved to do one last check. I knew I might regret it, but I also knew I wouldn't sleep if I left without understanding. I turned to the librarian and asked if there were any other areas of the building besides the main floors. He muttered something about a restricted section in the basement. He said it was off limits, but he also said no one went down there, so it probably wasn't locked. He gave me a long stare, then went back to writing. I felt a sense of dread rise in my chest, but I also felt drawn to check the basement. Maybe I'd find a clue. I walked through a short corridor behind the main desk and found a heavy door marked "Staff Only." It opened easily. A concrete staircase led down to the basement. A dull light shone from a single bulb at the bottom. The walls were rough, unpainted stone. I took each step carefully, gripping the iron railing. The air felt humid and I smelled a mix of earth and something metallic. I thought I heard water dripping somewhere. At the bottom, I reached a small space filled with old shelves of archived newspapers and documents. The stack was messy, with boxes on top of each other. I stepped between two shelves and found myself in a cramped aisle. The ceiling was low, and I had to duck a bit. I spotted a flicker of movement at the corner of the aisle, then heard a soft rustling. My heart hammered. I stood still, trying not to make a sound. The rustling came closer. I heard a scraping sound against the concrete floor. Then a large shadow slid across the wall in front of me. It was tall and had irregular shapes around the head and shoulders. I felt sweat drip down my temple. My stomach churned and my throat went dry. I tried to back up, but my foot hit a box. The box toppled over with a dull thud. I clenched my teeth, waiting for something to rush at me. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then I saw the shadow move back the other way. The scraping sound grew fainter until it vanished. I decided I'd had enough. I turned around and headed back up the stairs. My legs felt shaky, and I gripped the railing with both hands. When I reached the door leading to the main floor, I pushed through and felt a wave of relief at the sight of normal space again. The old man was gone from the front desk. I didn't see or hear him anywhere. That made me more uneasy, but I didn't try to find him. I went straight for the doors. Outside, the late afternoon sun hit my face, and I realized how tense I was. My shoulders ached from being hunched. My jaw felt sore from clenching. I looked back at the building, half expecting to see that figure in one of the windows. I didn't see anyone or anything. The whole structure looked calm, like a typical old library. I didn't feel calm, though. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and I could still hear the whispers in my head. I walked away, determined to put distance between myself and that place. On the sidewalk, I took a few deep breaths. People passed by with casual glances, unaware of how rattled I felt. My heart rate slowed a bit, but my nerves stayed on edge. I tried to process everything I'd seen. The whispers, the strange figure, the scratch marks, the flickering lights, and that ominous shadow in the basement. Nothing made sense. My mind kept cycling through possibilities, but I didn't want to keep thinking about it. I felt tired and unsettled. I stood there for a moment, deciding if I should go back inside and look for the old man. I realized I didn't want to risk running into that figure again. I felt exposed just standing near the entrance. I checked my watch. The day was almost over. A wave of relief washed over me because I knew the library would close soon. I didn't want to be locked in there after hours. I knew I might come back someday, but I wasn't sure. Whatever was inside that building felt dangerous, or at least beyond anything I could handle on my own. I turned and walked down the street. With every step, I felt my back muscles loosening. The further I got, the better I could breathe. But I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see a tall, distorted shape following me. I never did. Still, the memory stuck with me. I can't shake the sensation that something lingered in that library, something that wasn't human. I don't know if it was real, or if my mind was playing tricks on me. All I know is what I heard and what I saw. That's enough to keep me from going back there anytime soon.